Greetings and welcome to For the Love of Fiction, a podcast about narrative and characterization across a wide range of mediums. I'm your host, Gavin Groves, and with me is my co-host, Mark Tobit.
You lucky people.
Hello, mate.
Oh, man, I don't think that catchphrase is going to stick.
I didn't hear any laughter or horror.
Oh, I'll keep working on it.
How you doing?
Same old, same old.
That's your catchphrase. That's your catchphrase.
It really is, yeah.
So, before we get on with this episode, I just want to mention that we are currently in the middle of our proper summer in the UK in September, and it's so hot and humid and horrible. The last few episodes I've recorded with the window closed. Today, it's open. If you hear anything, I don't care. Tough. So
you're going to hear some of the natural wildlife.
It's quite possible. You might hear a cat like killing something because there's a white cat that lives next door and he's always hanging around the garden and hunting things. So who knows what could happen? I assume you may be in a similar situation with the window as well.
The idea of closing it right now, it just makes me sad, man. It has to stay open.
So anyway, yes. So we're going to discuss very quickly what we've been up to. And the first item on the agenda, I think we've both, over time, sort of taken this stance where we're not going to tell each other what we're going to talk about in this section now. Am I right in saying that?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that happened. I think that's cool, though, because it means there's a bit of surprise. So I've got one for you, actually, that it's going to make you go, I don't know if you've seen it. I don't think you've read it, but you know how I feel about it. So I've been watching, because I've recently acquired a free 30 days worth of Amazon Prime, because I never pay for it. I've been watching the Wheel of Time TV show.
Ooh.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen Wheel of Time. I never read the books, but I've spoken to several fans. I say fans. I've spoken to several people that have read the books.
Well, all of them.
They've read a significant portion. I think one or two of them had finished the series.
Yeah.
It's a polarizing series.
Yes. So my route into the Wheel of Time is I read it when I was very young, after Lord of the Rings, and after I read Raymond Fast's The Magician, the Rift War series. And I can't remember who recommended it to me. I'm not sure, but it was definitely in my teens. And despite being very, very similar to Lord of the Rings early on, I mean, in regards to it being set in like farm areas, a wizard-like character going into the farm area, then these characters who have to go somewhere because of something really important join the wizard, and then they are followed by monsters who are under the control of the villain.
I think I've heard this story before, man.
I know, right? It's quite horrific, really. It's quite horrific how similar it is. But over time, it does sort of move away from, Tolkien's formula. Truth be told, Robert Jordan is quite a good prose writer. Something that I've always really admired about him is his characterization. It's something that inspired me early on as a writer. He spends a lot of time in his characters' inner monologues with free-range discourse, often in italics or inner monologues. They're constantly analyzing and questioning the situations which they find themselves in, which I think is effective. Some people maybe not. I remember you once commented on one of my novels you read maybe 15 years ago about how constantly I go into my characters' heads.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, it's not for everyone. For me, it's good. I like it a lot. I mean, if it's a third-person narrative, then obviously you can canonically get away with that kind of thing. But anyway,
inner monologue can help you understand better the machinations and the politics that are taking place in conversations sometimes.
Yes.
Rather than trying to allude to it through body language.
It depends. It depends. There's different ways to go about it, In university, we were taught less is more, too much is too much. Maybe Jordan's style would be viewed as overly gratuitous in terms of its, attempts to make the characters read off the page. I don't know. but I personally have always liked it. That kind of character that bleeds off the page has always been something that attracts me. I try to do that with mine. I've always wanted, if you can imagine reading one of my novels, the book literally being like some kind of, what would you call it? Like the book is a conductor for these characters' emotions in your hands, like you can feel it. That's something I've always tried to find. Anyway, one thing that I do like about the Wheel of Time, anyway, is the setup. You know, the concept of the wheel and how magic in the world evolved through this wheel, and how in the universe men are forbidden to use it because of how dangerous it is. The villain, the Dark One, is a man himself, you know, and for is partially to blame for the fact that men can't use this. I think it was called the One Power. And then, you know, he is a bit like Sauron in a sense. He's dark and he's forever in the distance and waiting to come back and stuff, you know. But you know, I always like the setup, but you know, it's 14 books. You know, I think we've discussed before about stories that never end. You know, originally the Wheel of Time was supposed to be 6 books. I got to book 5 and I couldn't handle it anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was bored. I think I've read articles and I've read essays about world building versus story. You know, if you are writing a story that is mostly world building, are you even writing a story? Or are you writing a travel log or a Wikipedia entry? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do agree with that. I veer towards story. You know, I would say that The Grapes of Wrath by Jim Steinbeck is as epic as Lord of the Rings, and it's half the size because of what it does in the 600 pages. You know, doesn't
I've read authors myself. I mean, Ian M. Banks, for instance,
yeah,
who is a phenomenal world builder in terms of his writings.
too much in my opinion.
Exactly. This is the thing, though, is there
Too
are
much.
times in his stories. Whilst don't get me wrong, some of the worlds in which he crafts are immensely interesting, but at the end of the day, you could take them away from the story, and nothing narratively would be lost.
Agreed. This is the point I'm getting at, is how much is too much. I guess in the end, you know, there are readers out there who like the world building. In the end, the Wheel of Time became this giant political, world-sized fantasy, you know, epic saga. Saga is the correct term. And I seem to remember like the 5th book, the main character hardly being in it. And the main character, the initial cast of characters are all fine. They're all quite good, you know. So I don't know, but I saw the film adaptation, and it's got mixed reviews so far. And the film adaptation, the TV adaptation, and then the second series is starting to get slightly better reviews. And I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go. You know, and I'm watching it, and it has been 15 years since I last read one of the books, and it does seem like stuff has been changed quite dramatically. But at the same time, many of the core principles of the world are there as well, which are still quite effective. But it does seem to be cheaply made, as it is. The concept of this power being so great that men are not allowed to use it and only women can. I mean, this was a novel written 25 novel series started 25 years ago, 35 years ago now.
I suppose that resonates with some politics these days.
It does. It does. I wouldn't say that he was a staunch feminazi, but at the same time, it's an interesting idea, and I always thought it was an interesting idea, you know. So, but you know, so far it's fine. Rings of Power is not something that I have any interest in watching ever, and I've yet to be impressed by anything from Amazon, to be honest with you. But it's just a way of condensing the story, really, and I've got a free month, so I'm giving it a go. I also just finished reading The Last Temptation of Christ, and I have to say, like, the finale was absolutely riveting. Like, the crucifixion, which doesn't happen to the end of the novel, spoiler alert, was brilliantly depicted. Basically, long story short is that Jesus gets onto the cross and then faints, and then the next like 50 pages is him living life as if he didn't get on the cross in like a dreamlike state. And
Like
how
a fever dream, yeah.
yeah, it's really effective. I was really moved by it, to be honest with you, by this point. And then you know, the ending is kind of predictable in the end, because it is about man and free will and sacrifice. and making the right choice and what is good and what is not. You know, and I suppose you can probably guess what the ending is by me telling you what I've just told you. But, you know, in the end, I really enjoyed it. I kind of wish it was a bit shorter, though. It was definitely long. I mean, the story of Jesus, unless you are the kind of person that doesn't read or watch TV or watch films or listen to radio or listen to music, has no inkling whatsoever about like story medium in the slightest. I mean, we all know something about the story of Jesus, so I feel like the 500-page novel that took 450 pages to get to the point where we see Jesus living a normal life was too long. You know, it went on too long for me, and I thought he could have cut a bit out of it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to watching the film. Looking forward to watching the film. But yeah, once I finished this, I was looking at my bookshelf, my to-read bookshelf, and I picked up Poodle Springs, which is a book I picked up probably a year ago from a charity shop. I've fobbed you off with some Raymond Chandler before, haven't I, Mark?
How so?
The Big Sleep. I'm pretty sure I made you read it. I'm pretty sure I made you read it.
Yes, I will be honest. It was a very interesting book.
For me, sorry,
well, it's just well, in terms of a different time, it's several times removed, and the idea of sitting in your car waiting for the perp to come out of his house whilst drinking a pint of whiskey, and before calmly pulling away and following them, probably quite half cut by that point. And
you got the impression Philip Marlowe is half cut most of the time.
But there is a certain charm to it. You can almost feel the kind of the 40s gumshoe. He literally laid down the groundwork for it, didn't he?
He did, and he perfected it. There was another author before him. Well, there's loads of authors. It's the pulp era, and so the pulp gumshoe was on vogue.
The thing is that when it comes to the gumshoe aspect, I've actually read more satire than I have original material when it comes to that sort of thing. For instance, Douglas Adams used to have a series called Dirk Gently.
Yes.
And he used to specialize in the fact that when it comes to a gumshoe story, there's 4 locations. There's the gumshoe's office, there's the bar, there's the alleyway where someone takes a shot at him, and then there's the rooftop where he has the final climax. And he is to play on those concepts of like, no, we have to get it in the right order.
Well, I'm actually a big fan of the genre. The reason why I discovered the genre is A, because of my love of Humphrey Bogart, but also because of Neuromancer. Back to Neuromancer. William Gibson cited Raymond Chandler's narrative voice as the inspiration for his narrative voice in Neuromancer. And
obviously, that's why it transferred so well across to Blade Runner as well. That same concept of the gumshoe.
Hard-boiled detective fiction is very, very similar. Essentially, yeah, Blade Runner is a noir story, but bear in mind, Blade Runner predates Neuromancer. Apparently, when William Gibson saw Blade Runner, he was writing Neuromancer, and he literally was horrified. He thought he was going to get sued because of how similar his ideas were and how similar the imagery of the world they created. Because while Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep has many similar ideas as Blade Runner, Blade Runner is a very different novel, and tonally the world is much more dystopian, I would say.
That is true. It doesn't lean so much on the hard-boiled detective, as you put it,
as well, yeah. But yeah. Anyway, as I was saying, Poodle Springs is the last novel in the Philip Marlowe series because Raymond Chandler was writing it in '59 and died mid-release, and so it was released posthumously. And so this novel was completed by the fiction author Rob B. Parker, who I've never read. Apparently, he's written 40 novels about the private detective Spencer. I don't know, but anyway. The reason why I am such a big fan of Raymond Chandler it's his prose. There's only so much you can do in the hardboiled detective area, let's say. As you say, there are specific genre tropes that come up over and over again. And some of his novels are better than others. Some of his stories are better than others. But forever, his prose are razor sharp, funny, and cynical. That tone, that voice. It's like he was made to be, like Philip Marlowe was made to be portrayed by Humphrey Bogart. I just love it. I just love reading his words. Almost every single time I read one of his books, I read a passage and think, that is so concise. He wastes not an iota. You know, doesn't waste a syllable. It's so perfectly constructed most of the time. It's borderline literary. He in 1959 or pre-1959, he is writing stuff that's better than a lot of stuff I've read today. You know, it just every time I read him, I just think this is it. Whereas where a lesser author would spend a paragraph describing or stating a character doing something inconsequential, Chandler would do it in a sentence, and the word choice is just perfect every time. Just So yes, big fan of Chandler. Almost sad to say that this is the final Philip Marlowe novel, so I'll be finishing that in the next couple of days because it's only short. I'm looking forward to it. So what have you been up to?
Well, we've been mainly watching stuff this week. First things first, I did a deep dive on a recent live action adaptation, which throws back to my previous point earlier on, of One Piece.
Oh yes, that's just come out, hasn't it?
And it's just got released on Netflix, and
Yes.
I've been a fan of One Piece ever since I was in my 20s. I've been into it a couple of decades. I've read the entirety of the manga, which is a significant read at this point. We're talking over 1,000 issues at this point.
I was going to say, how many volumes do you know? Well, actually, no. You carry on talking, and I'm going to look that up.
There are a significant amount of volumes, and at this point, when a series of manga gets to this sort of level, you become a little bit more disinclined to encourage it to other people because you're almost giving them a burden at this point. You don't want to sort of turn around and go, oh, yeah, you should get into this series or you should get into this show. I mean, the show alone has got hundreds of episodes. And to that end, it is a bit of a titan in the manga industry. And I've read it through up to present twice in the last couple of years just to refresh myself because a lot of those early issues are really good to read. They're very good stories. However, the story as it goes right now, it does feel like One Piece is winding down. The story is slowly but surely starting to tie up all its knots, and it's getting ready to resolve in some fashion or another. Although no
Oh,
one's
it's
really
it's still going.
yeah, it's still
Oh,
going.
oh, wow.
So to that end, I really sincerely hope I do get to see the ending. Whether Oda, the writer, has experienced health issues of late, and as we've discussed before, the concept of a series, especially one on this scale, potentially being unfinished would be deeply upsetting. But one benefit is that Netflix recently funded a live action adaptation, and they poured the money into this one. They really, really funded it highly, and it shows. It is a very, very true to life. They've adapted it so closely that it's actually kind of impressive. I mean, the
So,
initial.
sorry to stop you there.
Mhm.
Is it better than the Cowboy Bebop
Oh, very
reimagining?
much so. Very much so.
Because I like Cowboy Bebop a lot, and I saw the trailer, and I honestly, I just
I wanted
immediately,
to like Cowboy Bebop live action. I
yeah,
really wanted to
I
like
haven't
it.
even bothered. It just
Even the
it didn't
actor,
look good.
it's to my mind, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the guy they got to play Spike was
He's been in a few things, yeah.
he had a certain level of charm for it, but it lacked something. I can't put my finger on what it lacked, but it just wasn't Bebop. But this, I mean, the guy they've cast as Luffy, he just channels the main. He just channels his enthusiasm.
Does he go, Monkey D. Luffy?
They've had to tone down a couple of things.
Of course they have. I'm joking.
But nonetheless, it's not too far removed, and it's also interesting that they've got a very diverse cast of different accents, which actually adds something to it because it gives you more of an impression that these are people that are collected from across a world. And for instance, they have one character in it, Sanji, who's a blonde-haired chef, and in this they've decided to opt to make him British, and it actually really adds something to the character. I can't put my finger on why, but it really is just a very good representation. They've already announced the numbers in terms of the viewing, and they said that it's already outdone Stranger Things and Wednesday in terms of viewership. It's
Yes, I saw that. Yes.
one of the most viewed shows on Netflix, and that pretty much guarantees that they're going to make more episodes. And in the space of 8 one-hour episodes, they've managed to streamline the first 40 or 50 episodes of the anime.
Do you think something's been lost because they've streamlined it, or do you think it's worked so far?
I think it's worked so far. I mean, they've hit all the keynotes that they have to hit when it comes to the plot, and One Piece is something that has a lot of fluff to it. At the end of the day, you don't run 500, 600, 700 episodes and not have some fluff. And I feel that this is something that would is beneficial to it. I mean, if they created a live action series that ran the same level as the anime, for a start, it'd take years, if not decades, for the thing to finally be fully made. But this is a very interesting way in which to view it. It's just, I know this is a story I've known for a long time, and it's nice to see an adaptation of it that's actually translated it very well and faithfully, because there is a certain stigma attached to.
It looks faithful, that's for sure. And the shots I saw of the characters, I was like,
Yeah.
wow. Has Zorro been in it yet? How's he been? Is he well done?
Oh yeah, he has all the
3
elements.
swords?
Yep.
In the
One
mouth?
in his mouth. Yep.
Oh,
And with the full explanation, including every single one of them, it has a full backstory explaining these elements as to why he carries 3 swords and all that sort of stuff in flashback form, whilst also playing out the present. It's just very good. I don't know. It's a show that it's a story I've always found charming, and it's nice to see it made into a show.
You know, I watched some of the anime, and I thought it was quite good. I'm not a super fan, you know, but I can see why people like it.
Yeah, it is the biggest selling manga of all time.
Really? What, even more than Dragon Ball?
Oh yes, it is already deeply outsold that.
Mind you, there's so many episodes. Dragon Ball ended, didn't it? Well,
it's outsold the Bible. It's just it's a titan, like it's a juggernaut as far as manga is concerned. It'll be a long time before you find anything that gets to the same level as One Piece.
It's been going long enough.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I'm curious to see where this is going to go. I'll certainly be keeping an eye on that. I also got round to watching the latest Indiana Jones movie.
Oh no! Why did you do that?
I wouldn't be so fast to say that, man.
Really? I don't know.
I mean,
I didn't watch the last one. I'm glad. I don't want to watch it ever.
I'll put this in my pocket for later, and it is another thing I think might be open to discussion at a later time in this podcast, because I think it is something that would bring a lot of passion forward from you yourself.
Are you saying that I should watch it?
It might not hurt.
Oh.
I mean, Crystal Skull, I'm never going to recommend that to anybody, but this one's...
I've heard people say things about it, let's say. I heard some people sort of go, It tugged.
Right.
It tugged.
It hit some certain notes in it which made me go, you know what? But I do understand your distaste for the use of nostalgia.
Yes. Well, if it serves the plot and it serves the character, then that's fine. But if it's just shoehorned in for the sake of it to go, to the audience, then no, I don't like it because it's cheap. That's my issue with nostalgia. You know,
I'd like to put a pin in this one, and if in the future you feel that you might want to check it out, I'd like to come back to this, because I feel a discussion about the utilization of franchises years and decades after their time, such as Ghostbusters Afterlife.
I have mixed feelings about that one myself, ironically. We could talk about that. We could do this. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the idea of like nostalgia in franchises. Star Wars would be another good one to touch upon, I imagine.
That's a whole episode in itself.
Yeah.
You know,
but there is a certain era that we're going through right now where a lot of the franchises of our childhood are being raided and utilized to create what they hope are new franchises, often with not much success. And I think that's something that bears a bit of discussion.
I'm just making a note of that idea. Planning the podcast while we're making the podcast. That's how we roll.
Yeah.
What's the next thing on your list?
Finally, I watch. You and I are both fans of wrestling, and I've been following WWE. And narratively, there's a story that's been taking place for a significant amount of time at this point. It is the story of the Bloodline with Roman Reigns and his ascent to the tribal chief, the head of the table. Yes. Wherein he's become the longest running world champion.
It was his calling, that's for sure. The less he says, the better. The less he wrestles, the better. I hate to say it. As a man who is very, very good at just standing there looking really hard, he is in his zone right now.
Yes. Although now it's got to that point in the story where a lot of people are starting to question, has this story been run too far?
It does sound like it's been going on for a while. I mean, how long has it been now?
Well, he's been holding the belt for over 3 years.
Is that back in the day? They would hold it for a while.
Yeah, but they've held it for decades. But this is the longest modern champion in WWE. Like in terms of holding the belt.
Longer than when Brock had it. That was 2 years, wasn't it? Right?
He's held this for over 1,000 days. I think they marked it a couple of months ago, and he must be 3 years now at this point. And it has got to a point wherein they've had betrayals. They've had numerous characters shift in and out of this story in the form of Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, Cody Rhodes. Yeah. You've got both of the Usos, Solo. You've got Heyman in the back, who he is just a joy to watch, no matter what the hell he's doing. But it is the idea and concept of when it's too much. When has it got to a point when your story, you're starting to retread old ground, you're repackaging earlier plot points?
Can I just let you in on a little secret? When all this starts happening, it means they never had an ending planned in the first place, and they were playing it by ear.
Absolutely,
unfortunately.
And to be honest, that went in their favor in the early days of this story because it was fresh, it was something interesting, and
it is good to drag us. It is good to have a story that is planned over a long period of time. You know, that has often been the problem with wrestling in the last 2 years. Is that maybe because they feel like audiences don't have attention spans anymore, or maybe they're part of the problem. And they've just been whipping through storylines left, right, and centre, whipping through champions left, right, and centre.
They want to pay off by the end of the night rather than.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get as many overarching storylines as you used to. Oh, that said, I say used to. I mean, we come from the era of Russo and Bischoff, and some of those storylines lasted literal minutes at times before they were cast aside and a fresh one was put in place. So. But wrestling's always been a strange medium when it comes to narrative storytelling. It's one which great stories have been told to great effect, and
definitely. Sometimes it's been very, very well done. Sometimes it's been really awful, and questionable. But when it's good, when it works, it can work very effectively.
It can give you the shivers, and it can actually give you that moment of like, oh wow.
Maybe we'll do like our top 5 wrestling storylines episode or something at some point. That'll be a good one to talk about.
Absolutely, I'd be intrigued by that.
That'd be a good one.
That would cover me in terms of everything that I've been checking out of late.
All right, cool. Well, you know, the idea behind this episode is the first part of an ongoing series, which we're going to dedicate to discussing anime and manga. I think I originally pitched it as 90s anime, but because the Guyver is technically speaking 90s anime if you're in the West. But you picked JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's not 90s anime, market, not anymore. It's sort of transcended time now because there was a 90s series, and then JoJo is even more popular than ever because of the ongoing anime adaptation. It's been going on for the last 10, 15 years. Am I right?
Yeah, it's
like the third one they've done.
Multiple itinerations.
Exactly. So I think we'll just stick to the anime episode.
Yeah, I was going to refer to Stardust Crusaders specifically as my era.
Yeah.
But with references back to the previous eras for Jonathan Joestar.
Cool. Well, that'll be in the second segment. For the next segment, I will be discussing and sharing some ideas about the Guyver. So we're going to bio boost into a break. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. So here we go. It's time now, Mark, for a discussion on the Guyver, something that dates back to our childhoods.
Absolutely.
Allow me to give you a quick rundown. So, Bio Booster Guyver was originally a manga by Yoshoki Takaya, and it began in 1985. However, the manga comic book series is, I can guarantee, not the way that most Western audiences discovered this character. It was most likely through manga videos, 1990s, 12-episode OAV release. How did you first discover the Guyver, Mark?
It's when I saw it in your room, like when we were younger. You were the one who introduced it to me. We used to watch it in your bedroom.
Right. Well, that's not how I first discovered Guyver, not through, as I said, the OAV series. I discovered it through what is likely the other way many Western boys discovered the Guyver. And that was through the live-action movie Mutronics, the movie.
What a classic cult.
As is often the case, it was my father who introduced me and my brother to Mutronics. I can still remember. I remember it vividly. I can't remember how old we were. The film came out in 1991, so we were probably 8 or 9 by the time it came out over here. And this was after my parents had divorced, and my dad would pick us up and just out of his house, and we would rent a movie, horror movies often that we shouldn't be watching. And we loved superhero movies, and Dad was telling us about it before we rented it. He said, I saw this film the other day because he'd already watched it. And he sort of describing it. He says it was something like this guy gets his power suit and he gets all these powers, and he was doing all these sound effects and martial arts fighting and things to me and my brother, and we were just sitting there just going, when do we watch it? We were sold. And so, yeah, we rented it. And Mutronics, the movie, as it was known only in Europe, I believe it was known as Guyver in America, mixed practical special effects and body horror with martial arts action. And yeah, proved absolutely incredible to me and my brother. We were absolutely blown away by it. It was one of the coolest things we'd ever seen. It was, as we say, essentially a superhero story, but it was violent. Well, to our eyes, it was violent anyway. Really, it was the action sequences are not much more violent than Power Rangers for the most part. But as is often the case, the Guyver at some point dies in the narrative, and how the Guyver always dies is horrific. And they use stop motion, body horror style special effects, and it was absolutely disgusting. Also, remember, Mark Hamill was in it and suffers an absolutely disgusting fate. And Michael Berryman, the guy from The Hills Have Eyes.
Oh, yeah, he's a classic image of him.
Yeah.
With the wide open eyes and everything,
Yeah. Like, the monster effects in it were kind of cool, but they were sort of billed as being funny. I mean, there was like a rapping monster in it. Do you remember that?
Oh God, that's one that my mind blocked out.
It's quite a bad film, really. When you go back to it in retrospect, have you seen this one?
Long time ago, man. It was a long time ago.
To be honest, like, it's just a curio now. It doesn't really do anything with the story. It changes characters.
Well, this comes back to my point of the live action adaptation of animes, is that they've had a troubled history. Often where artistic license does get taken, especially when they're transferring it to a Western audience, with the intent of it being consumed by a Western audience.
Mm-hmm.
Often names will be changed, which is understandable, but often settings, people will be changed altogether. I mean, from what I remember correctly, Mutronics didn't have anything of the same setup of the original anime, did it?
It had some of it. Like, he was the main character, became Sean Barker rather than Sho Fukumachi, and he was a student, a school student, but in order for him to be able to do martial arts like Power Rangers, when he's the Guyver, he is also a karate student. And it's sort in the beginning, it's a bit like the Karate Kid, he's like the runt of the class, and like he gets beaten up by the bullies, and then he gets the Guyver unit and whatever. But for the most part, the setup is the same. It's got the Kronos Corporation. It has the Zoanoids. The Guyver unit is the small spherical unit at first, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, we'll discuss more the plot, shall we say, of the overall story in a bit. Really, I just want to give us a rundown of like the media ventures, because after this film, that's when we discover the 12-part OAV, which means only available on video. And this was a manga video release on VHS. And I remember, I think at the time, we had rented Gunhead. You ever see Gunhead, Mark?
That's just rang a bell in my head, but I have no idea I can't tie any imagery to it.
It's a Japanese mecha live action / horror film, sort of mixes alien style Marines in it. I can't remember. I want to watch it again because it's been so long. I imagine it's probably bad. You could find the trailer on YouTube, but you can't.
I'm gonna, because I know that I've seen something called that. But
what if I described the word Gunhead like being in big letters, and then the narrator going Gunhead? Does that make sense? Is that familiar? Because that's what I always remember.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'd rented Gunhead on VHS, and that's when we saw the trailer for the Guyver OAV. And as was the case with a lot of manga video Western releases, they took away the Japanese music scores, which were often, sorry if this upsets anyone, cheesy as hell, and they replace it with hard rock and metal. And I'll never forget the theme to this. That guitar lick that just starts and then it just builds and builds and it goes, the Guyver, and you just get this minute of Guyver, just Guyver bashing, Zoanoid bashing. And it was just, yeah.
I still remember they did that to Dragon Ball, man. I mean, don't get me wrong, Head Chala was a song, but Dragon, Rock the Dragon was catchy as all hell as well. There was something they did that to a lot of like anime, wherein they rocked it up a little bit for Western audiences.
Yeah. But yeah, this OAV was released as 12 30-minute episodes per VHS tape. One episode per VHS tape.
Huh.
I have them. I still got them. But
how long would they take? 30 minutes, though?
30 minutes on average.
On a VHS?
One VHS tape. 12 tapes, each one 30 minutes.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing with that. So.
Yeah, £5 to £6 a pop. Like, my mum thought it was a rip-off, but to someone who was, 12, 9, 10, 11, I didn't have a lot of money. So that one thing that I had to look forward to a month, because it was monthly, was like the best thing ever. I can remember going into like HMV and going to the manga section and, always looking out for the next episode and buying them and taking it home and being absolutely blown away by it. But yeah, it was a massive success for manga, it turns out, because I don't know if you know this or not, but the Guyver's not really that popular in Japan. Never was. It was always a cult thing.
Really?
Yeah. As you are surprised because of how popular it was over here.
It was. I mean, people knew about it. It was known. That's probably as high praise as you can give it, any sort of anime.
I like to think it's probably because Guyver was released into an oversaturated market in Japan. Guyver as a idea is heavily influenced by like classic Japanese superhero TV shows like Ultraman and Kamen Rider.
And I always got a vibe of Super Sentai from it, though I don't think it really qualifies as that, does it?
No, Super Sentai means it's team-based. Incidentally, a little bit of trivia for you. The Guyver live-action movie with Mark Hamill was released in 1991, and Power Rangers started over here on TV in 1993. So to call it
could be drawn.
Well, to call it a Power Rangers copy in terms of its fighting is not quite accurate, actually, in many ways. It's just that, it's a copy of like the Japanese. You could say that the live-action show film is clearly a representation of the Super Sentai TV shows and Ultraman and Kamen Rider, basically, done in its own way. So yeah, and then but sadly, I don't know if you remember the 12-episode series, but it ends. But the manga was still going. They just stopped making it. There was 12 episodes and that was it.
I do remember this because when I was younger, we watched those 12 episodes and I ended up coming back to it in manga form several years later. I mean, this is still quite a while ago.
Yeah, hold off there. We'll discuss the manga most definitely very, very soon. But yeah, this is a series that I was really into and upset that it ended. Just when the story was getting interesting. I don't know if you remember, but episode 11 is the of the 12 is the episode where the entire history of the world is revealed.
I do remember. I understand. Yeah, that was actually a storyline when the reveal of the origin and everything.
Yeah.
Actually was a very interesting concept.
Yeah, it was. That's right. And then the series ends the next episode.
Yes. And it's like they've set up this like, holy shit, this changes everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. Mind-blowing stuff it was. I remember being absolutely mind-blowing for it. We'll discuss it soon. But yeah, we'd be stuck with just the limited information that we have until Guyver Dark Hero. Did you see this one?
I did not.
You never saw Guyver Dark Hero?
No, I don't think I ever did go around to that one.
I thoroughly recommend you watch it. For a few reasons. Number one, David Hayter.
Snake Plissken.
Yes. Well, not Snake Plissken, Solid Snake. he calls himself Iroquois Plissken.
I always
doesn't
get those
he?
two crossed over.
No, it's intentional. It's intentional. It's intentional.
Anytime I hear the word snake,
It's very, very intentional. The reason why, part of that, yes, Solid Snake is heavily influenced by Snake Plissken, so much so that John Carpenter noted it, but didn't sue Hideo Kojima because he thought Solid Snake was awesome in his own right. That's how awesome John Carpenter is.
that is fucking awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. But yes, and then like obviously there's that tribute where Solid Snake he fakes his death in Metal Gear Solid 2, and then you see someone who looks just like him, but he's not called Solid Snake. His name is Iroquois Plissken. So there you go. But yes, Guyver Dark Hero. I could be wrong with whether he wrote it or not. He definitely stars in it. He had something to do with Mutronics as well, but basically, Solid Snake is the Guyver in this film. And while he's not putting on his Solid Snake voice, because that would be crazy, there are like in the TV show when Sho calls the Guyver unit, he goes, Guyver!
That was the best part, like when he got that sphere of energy around him and it used to sort of mold and meld around him. That was brilliant.
Now, in Mutronics, the movie, it's almost always an accident when he calls the Guyver unit because he's young. But Guyver Dark Hero is set quite a long ways after the first film because it's the same character. He's called Sean Barker in it. And by this point, he has mastered the power of the Guyver. And he calls the Guyver. But you know what he does when he calls the Guyver? He does this. He goes, Guyver. Just quiet to himself. But it's Solid fucking Snake saying it, Mark.
Okay, I can see the coolness on that. I will be honest. There's a certain... So, I mean, in my mind, Guyvers are always summoned by throwing your arms out and screaming at the top of your lungs. But I can imagine the awesomeness of someone just quietly whispering it under their
Solid
breath.
Snake quietly whispering it.
Yes.
I want to re-illustrate here. But yeah, this is a low-budget live-action film, long story short. The fight scenes are better. There's more gore. I always remember this being this really awesome intro where the Guyver, Sean Barker, the character, is lost at the beginning of the story. And Kronos has been destroyed, as far as we know, at the end of the first film. And he's taken to the life of a vigilante. He's Batman, but the Guyver. And there's this amazing scene at the beginning. I mean, it's amazing. It's a low-budget, schlocky film where he rescues someone from a crook and puts him up against the wall. And he fakes that he's going to save him and then turns around and slices his throat with the high-frequency blades on his elbow. And it's just, so cool. And then he, like the Crow, he, carves the word Guyver in this metal grating with his laser beams. So silly and cheesy. But what is important about this film, apart from the fact that you get to see him run off a cliff and jump and transform in midair, pretty cool, even if it is done in 90s low-budget special effects, is that at this point, we got more of the Guyver story than we'd ever had before. They actually took the narrative further than the OEV. We got to see the alien spaceships that are so often discussed, and we also get to see a Guyver Zoonoid, which was a concept that is only hinted at in the manga at this point.
Really? That's an interesting idea.
I'm telling you now, man,
that's one thing I felt they never explored enough of, is the idea of Guyver's units.
Hold your horses.
Yeah.
Hold your horses. So, because I'll tell you something, it's such a cram. Anyway, long story short, blah. Watch the film. I recommend it.
I shall do so.
Remember that it's low budget and 90s. It looks like an 80s, early 90s low budget horror film. But appreciate that they are giving you more than you can possibly... Well, at the time anyway. More than you could possibly have seen. So... But yeah, anyway, after the Guyver Dark Hero Guyver Dark Hero film was released, Viz released their English translation of the manga, which you have read as well.
Mm-hmm.
They released 7 volumes of it. And again, they stopped. So we got a little bit more again, and then they stopped. This show is just a tease. This series, such a tease. I'm pretty sure these 7 volumes cover the first 40 chapters, and I imagine that in Japan he was probably up to volume 20 or something by this point. so behind. But then in the early 2000s, we have ADV's the Bio Boosted Armor 26-episode anime TV series. Have you seen this one?
I believe I've seen some of it.
I, again, recommend you watch it.
Yeah.
It's good. It remakes and continues the story of the OAV, and it covers the first 10 volumes of the manga. So you get even more of what's been shown so far. It's still not enough, though, because it ends on the biggest fucking cliffhanger ever, as always. But it goes far enough to give you a taster of what comes later. It has modernized animation, which overall is cleaner than the 12-episode OAV, but I would say the fight scenes are weaker overall. It also has a banging intro song. Oh my god, it's banging. Oh, it's like a early 2000s Evanescence / Linkin Park nu metal J-pop song. It is awesome. But as I said, if you want to know more, then again, this is the place to go. Incidentally, I have seen it, or I neglected to mention earlier on because it was only ever released as a fan translation. There was also an 80s OAV called Guyver Out of Control, which told the story of the first 2 or 3 chapters of the manga, and it features a female Guyver. You heard about this one, Mark?
Nah.
It's borderline tentacle porn hentai. A Guyver unit taking over a woman. Yeah.
Do they play it up a little bit more?
They do. Incidentally, though, what is quite interesting is that it reflects the manga, because later on in the manga, Yoshiki Takaya adds a female Guyver later on. But yeah, up until this point, that's all we have of the Guyver. There's not been anything, as far as I know, since the 2005 26-episode TV series. And the manga continued until 2016, from where it's now on hiatus. So, very frustrating series to be passionate about. Very frustrating. So, Mark, I've just given this quick timeline of the show, of the media venture, let's say. What is it that makes the Guyver so memorable to you? What is it that you like about the Guyver? I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, by the way.
On that way, I will be honest. There is something very primal about the Guyver, in terms of the concept of a superhero. He is just it has got that superhero quality of having a young boy that has an event, same as like Spider-Man, for instance, wherein he gets given abilities against his will and feels the need that he has to defend his friends and family against.
This is why I got you on my podcast. You know what, right? Because that's exactly what I've written down as my note. But quite often I do this. When I set in my notes, I set up a section, and I have notes that I want to cover. And sometimes I won't say it; I'll just throw it to you. And almost every single time I've done it, you've said exactly what I wanted you to say. It's like I'm controlling you or something. Fantastic. Sorry, carry on, please.
It is. It's. I mean, that image alone of him just shouting Guyver and transforming is just a very cool concept. It's in and of itself, aside from the storyline and narrative and everything, it just visually looks so cool. And the story itself, once you actually start to delve into it, is an interesting story. It's I mean, at first it is easy to have that Power Rangers concept of he's a superhero and he fights monsters.
He's got a suit as well.
Yeah,
he's a human that puts a suit on and fights monsters. It is literally on the from a distance.
Value, yeah.
It is Power Rangers / Master Rider / Kamen Rider / Ultraman. Although Ultraman has a ton of it, blah, 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 but you can go on and
once you start to peel those layers back and you actually start to see the impetus that actually drives the story forward, and actually the reason for the monsters and everything aside from that, it's actually got a very deep storyline.
It has, yes, you're right. You see, what appealed to me about the Guyver when I was a kid, and this is going to relate to previous episodes, ironically, is, as you said, it is, in the sense, like Spider-Man, about a schoolboy who acquires powers. However, as has also been discussed, you personally prefer slightly lighter stuff, don't you?
Ordinarily, yes. Normally,
I tend to prefer darker, more angsty stuff. And that's why the Guyver has always been something I've enjoyed. Because while it is a power fantasy like Spider-Man, it's a power fantasy with incredible amounts of melodrama and angst. Like
Oh
tons.
my god, yes.
Tons of it. Because this is not a boy who puts on a suit and becomes powerful. This is not a boy who acquires superpowers. This is about a boy who is effectively merged with a slime monster who, when he calls, becomes a suit of armor that protects him, empowers him, but also has a mind of its own.
And
He's
will
like,
protect him regardless of the circumstances.
and protects him when he's unconscious, for example, as the plot so brilliantly does. It's literally, not only is he dealing with the Kronos Corporation who are trying to get the Guyver unit back, he's trying to deal with the anxiety of being a slime monster, literally, and like being scared all the time and of dying, as you know, as is the case in both manga and TV series. He learns very quickly what happens to a Guyver when it's destroyed, and it is incredibly disturbing and disgusting. One of the things that's so fascinating about the Guyver, which I'll go through the general plot shortly, is that it is a being of incredible power. So much power that it has to have a frequencer built into it to control and relay that power, because otherwise the power that it holds would just, as I quote, eat the host alive. And that, I remember even as a kid, post Akira, it was quite disturbing watching the Guyver unit just eat its host alive, because it's just,
it's
you
almost
know,
parasitic, isn't it? It's...
exactly. And that fusion of the superhero genre with like body horror, like John Carpenter-esque body horror, I would say, absolutely fascinated me. Yes, essentially the Guyver follows the concept of the monster of the week, play by play, week by week, formula. But at the same time, there's this, aside from the threat of the being a Guyver unit itself, there's always this darkness on the side, isn't there? There's always this never-ending threat and tension. Because it's not like, oh, you've got Rita Repulsa on another planet who's going, I'll get you next week. No, there's like this corporation that has a faction all around the world at first, that's all you know, and it's after them. And they're trying to capture him, but also remain secretive to a degree. And because of that, there's just this never-ending tension. Plus, it's also got a lot of complex villains, I would say. Do you remember Agito Makishima?
Rings a bell. You'd have to explain their part in...
Guyver 3.
Ah, of course, yeah.
He's Guyver 3.
Because I remember there being three... In the story, as far as I remember, there were three Guyvers. You had the first, which was Show. You had the second with the cracked control module.
Correct.
And that was the one that consumed himself, wasn't it?
That's correct, yeah. That's correct. Yes.
And then you had the third one, who was always who is that? For several episodes, as you tried to ascertain who it was that had that third module.
Yes, that was the early drama and tension, wasn't it? We're trying to work out who it was. Although, do you remember in the credits, it hinted at who it was? In the credits, you had like the ending music, and it would show pictures of the characters. It would show Sho, then it would show Mizuki, then it would show Tetsuo, and then when Agito's face came up, some voice went, "Bio Booster Armor Guyver, he's coming to get you." Like ironically over Agito, and it made me think Agito has definitely got the third unit. So, but yeah, when I don't know if you remember, but Guyver 3 shows up and he saves Sho, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He says some stuff for him, then that sort of tension and who it is sort of builds and builds and builds and builds until I think it's the 6th episode when he reveals who he is. And then you say you got Agito, who is always a fascinating character, because while he often helps Sho, and while he is the son of the president of Kronos Japan, he is always out for himself. And while he does help Sho often, his mind is always somewhere else.
He has his own motivations.
Yes, he does, and that makes him interesting. That does make him interesting. But yes, anyway, I was going to give you a bit of a summary of the story, Mark, and we can go through that because we've touched on it a little bit.
Mhm.
So the story of the Guyver begins millions upon millions of years ago when a race of aliens who become known as the Advents land on Earth. And at this point, life is in the primordial soup. It's not actually evolved yet. And the Advents create the dinosaurs. And the reason why they are creating life on this planet is because they are creating weapons for an unknown war. You remember this?
Yeah.
Yes. And then the dinosaurs are viewed as a failure, so they create man. And man becomes the base unit for the zoonoids, which become what the Advents would like to be their soldiers. And then from the zoonoids, they create the Zoolords, who are to be the generals who control zoonoids through telepathy. Do you remember the Zoolords?
Yes, I do. I remember that one which had beams of light in bars across himself.
Right, yes.
That's an image that sticks in my head when with reference to Zoolords, but I
Pur-
understand.
Purple and white.
Yes,
So you're talking about Murakami.
that's it. Yeah.
So, because Murakami is the character that explains all of this in the OAV. He does not in the manga. So, yes, the Zoolords are the generals, and they create this character called Alkenfell, who is the first Zoolord, who is the primary Zoolord, the Zoolord
Did
Prime.
they have
let's
like a
say.
gemstone or something in their forehead?
So they're called Zoa crystals, and
That's
that
it.
is
Yeah.
exactly, and that is what gives them their Zoolord powers. So, where does the Guyver fit into this? Can you remember?
The Guyver was like an amplification unit, wasn't it? It was a.
That's correct. It is implied that it is like how to put it, a tool that the Advents used, and nothing more.
Yeah, it was kind of like, say, the power loader in Aliens or something. So.
Exactly. And as a final experiment, they decide to test a Guyver unit on a human before, as a human being that hasn't been processed into a Zoolord, and the results are horrifying. They then test multiple creations against this Guyver/human unit. Sorry, it's not called Guyver yet. Anyway, they call it Guyver in a minute. They test this thing against all these different creatures, these zoonoids, and this combination kills all of them, and they are extremely happy with the results. And then when they turn around and say to this creature, "You may strip yourself of the armor now," the creature ignores them and then turns on the creators. And its power is so horrific that they name it Guyver, which means out of control in their language. Out of control meaning they can't control it. And the Advents brought with them a unit remover, which is a device they can use to actually separate a human host from any host, should I say, from the Guyver unit. And so they separate this first Guyver that would become known as Guyver 0, and then they kill the human. And then the creators are so horrified by what's happened, they leave. And they're so horrified because what they fear is, what if a Guyver unit merged with a Zoolord? They believed that if that happened, it would be
Unstoppable.
unstoppable. And so what they do is they leave Earth and then they throw a meteorite at it to try and destroy all life on it, because they're so just awful. It's so awful. And Alkenfall, if you remember, the Zoolord Prime, saves the world by throwing himself into the meteorite and stopping it, and wounds himself dramatically, and ends up having falling back to the planet and sort of going into like a never-ending sleep. And it's during this time that the Kronos Corporation is built around him, the 12 Zoolords. They're basically, for thousands of years, trying to understand who the Advents were, what the Zoonoids are, and what their purpose was. And it ends up going the way of Alkenfell himself is building a ship, which he calls the Ark. It's Japanese. out of the remains of the Advent spaceships that have been found on the planet, so that he may fly into space and find his creators. Which is not really it's not a villainous plot, is it really?
No.
What is villainous, though, is Commander Guo. Do you remember Commander Guo?
That name's familiar. Oh, you're
What,
gonna have to
if I
refresh my memory.
described him, he had like purple eyes, sleeked back blonde hair, and he spoke like an ashtray. I think his best line was, "Events have taken an unexpected turn."
Yeah.
You remember him because he's the one that relieves Agito's father from control of Chronos Japan, and he's the one that creates Enzyme, which is a zoonoid type with acidic blood, like an alien that can melt the Guyver armor. And yes, Guo is the
Is that
12th.
the one that melts the chest together so he can't
Correct.
release the
Mega Smasher? Correct.
That's it.
Yes, correct. Yes, he uses his acid to fuse the Guyver's chest armor so that he can't open his chest armor and unleash his superpower weapon, his chest beam, the Mega Smasher. But yeah, Guo is he's the 12th member of the Zoolords, the current Zoolords. Murakami, who you mentioned earlier on in episode 11 of the OAV, his design is that of quite a lot of similarity to Guo. He is like the test body of Guo, essentially. Guo's form is like a monstrous version of Murakami. But anyway, Guo is a villain, and repeatedly the villain of the series overall, because he isn't interested in Alkenfeld's wish to get back to the Advents. He wants to merge with a Guyver unit. He wants to be a Guyver Zoolord, to be all powerful. And much of the story evolves around them stopping him. If I remember correctly, Guo actually has the power to control black holes.
I do remember that the idea of a character flinging black holes at another character, like right
Yes.
at the end of one of the runs.
Basically the Viz manga adaptation ends with Guo forming a black hole to kill the heroes.
Yeah, I remember that image.
Awful. It's horrifying. It's so awful. And then what happens next is when we meet Alkenfeld, and Alkenfeld kills Guo. Basically, long story short. And then the power creep of the show goes in such a way that the writer, Yoshiki Takaya, then starts increasing the powers of the Guyver more. Do you remember me telling you about the Guyver Gigantic?
Oh, Gigantic Guyver.
Yeah. It's when Show merges with one of the relic ships, the alien ships.
And becomes pretty much a mech. So.
Yeah. That's not the last time, though. Like, in the later volumes, in the last 10 years, 10 years ago, the last time it was added to was 2016. There's a Zoolord that is literally Godzilla-sized, and then Guyver Gigantic Exceed and becomes literally Godzilla-sized. It literally goes into mech territory, Godzilla, Power Rangers territory, as I feel always was the way. You know. So, yeah.
Another parallel with Power Rangers, if you will.
Yeah. But, yeah, I do like to keep in touch with what's been going on, and it's frustrating. Where
do
the story
the series is done, or do you?
No, it's on hiatus.
Oh, but
what has been happening in the latter end of this run is that Guo returns with a fake Zoolord crystal and a team of vigilante Zoolords who are looking to cause trouble. Alkenfeld, as I say, is looking to return to the Advents. The heroes have split up. So you have Sho and whatnot, Tetsuo, Mizuki and whatnot. They're doing their thing. And you have Agito, who has his own team now. Do you remember Agito's retainer, the old boy, looks after that shack for them? And then there's this young woman who sort of looks up to him. Do you remember that in the anime?
Vaguely, yes.
Well, she becomes a Zoolord anyway to save him because she's is so in love with him. So that's mad as well.
Uh-huh.
And basically they are hunting Zoolords because they're that powerful at this point. And then a new character is introduced. I want to say his name is Appium or something like that, who's got this really weird design, who is also more powerful than Zoolords, because you know what these shows are like. It's
You've
about
got to keep upping
it's a power creep, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everything just gets more and more powerful. And then, right when it starts to get interesting around the idea of who this Appium is, it ends. So it's a shame, really. I get the impression that this series, it was his job, and it was never ending.
That's unfortunate when the passion becomes a chore.
I don't think it's a chore. I think that's I wouldn't say he ever lost passion. I'm not going to say that, but I think it was his job, and that's why it never ended. That's why a lot of these shows don't end. It's like, they're written in such a way that it's week to week, week to week, week to week.
But that is a grind that can break the strongest mangaka.
Well,
you hear stories about them, like
look at lots of TV shows. For example, like Star Trek: Next Generation. The same.
I do feel though that the mangaka is a much more of a singular role writing these stories compared to the likes of like Star Trek, which was much more of a collaborative effort.
Of course, yeah. In terms of the legwork, yes.
I mean, when you've got a singular person writing a story, you do hear a lot of stories about these guys and girls burning themselves out. I mean, alcohol addiction and the likes are rife among mangakas, because often you do work in an environment where you have 7 days to release your next issue,
and you're writing and drawing it all yourself. Yeah,
exactly. It's insanity.
It's insanity,
and that's what I mean about how a passion can turn into a chore, where a story which they were desperate to tell and that they wanted to share with the world can suddenly become an anchor around their neck when they realize they're now contractually obligated to complete it or to continue it, which is the much more like, I suppose that'd be the worst thing in terms of, if you've got a complete story, that's one thing, but if you don't have a complete story and you're expected to continue your story, I can see why that would suddenly become so much more difficult, because you don't want to betray the earlier stuff by diluting the later stuff. But that's just my perspective.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I say, unfortunately, the show was never, the manga was never finished. As I said, like, he started to reflect the other works and incorporate a female Guyver into it. I think Kronos, like, cloned Guyver too and created female Guyver, which makes a lot of sense. But, it never ended. And that's the worst thing about it. I mean, like, as I said, in a nutshell, it is kind of like all of the other, like, Monster of the Week shows, but it has got this really interesting, in-depth storyline and some interesting characters with, like, goals and ideas of their own that sort of propel the story in interesting ways. But, it deserves an ending. I've often wondered what the ending would be, and to me, I always envisioned an ending that would suit the narrative, to respect the characters. How could it end? How could the Guyver end? You got any ideas?
That's a tricky question, because there's multiple ways in which that story could potentially be ended. I mean, there is one with him eventually beating the bad guys and giving the suit up because he has no need for it anymore. Another would be that the suit evolves. I'm not certain.
The suit constantly evolves, mate.
Yeah, and it continues to evolve to a point where it's no longer an offensive weapon, but more it is part of him. They merge on a much more cellular level or something. I always
envisioned the end of the Guyver being the creator's return, and it's Agito and Sho fighting there. That's the end. Like, those two characters, polar opposites, essentially. You got one character who is cold, emotionless, heartless, an anti-hero, effectively, who does good sometimes only if it suits him, and doesn't care about anyone but himself. And you've got Sho, who only acts to protect his friends.
And then you've got these creators, in which draws them together with a common enemy.
Yeah, and I imagine, like, maybe they would come back eventually to wipe out, like, mankind, I guess.
Well, because you've got two of these things now running around, which they already found one was almost uncontrollable.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe they would come back. Maybe they would join forces to defeat them. But then what's left? I think Sho would have to kill Agito at the end.
You feel that there'll be a final one-on-one?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that would be the perfect ending to the Guyver.
Guyver versus Guyver would be the The ultimate, like, final climax.
The show would have to kill him, I think.
I don't think Show could.
That's why it would be a good ending, though.
Yeah.
But we'll never know, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But I personally have continued the legacy of the Guyver in my own way, Mark. Don't know if you know about this, but I was going to say to cap this conversation off, or discussion, or lecture, maybe. I apologise for that.
No, it's been immensely interesting, man.
Yeah, it's fascinating
Thank you for
stuff,
this
mate.
walk down memory lane.
Yeah. Like, the Guyver has always been one of the most influential franchises to me. I discussed earlier how, like, in terms of comic books, my 2 novel series, Return of Millennia is like X-Men, Millennia's X-Men, Returner's like Batman, but the Guyver is also hugely influential on Returner. Hugely influential. The concept of, someone being changed by an alien life form, and that alien life form being like a weapon, it just, it's always fascinated me. I've always loved it, and I've since I was a kid, I can remember the origins of the Patriarch, the character called the Patriarch in Returner, being in like this ninja that I drew when I was about 9, and I think the inspiration of this character was a combination it was Guyver and the Venom symbiote, and just always been fascinated by that concept. Always.
I can see the similarities between Venom and Guyver, to be honest.
Yeah, tell me about it. Right, it's similar ideas, isn't it?
Yeah,
very similar. It's just that with Venom, I think, and Carnage, they're sort of both at the same time, aren't they? They're sort of together, but the Guyver is dormant unless
summoned.
No. When a Guyver unit, a host wears a Guyver unit, the Guyver's not conscious, is it? The Guyver only takes control to protect the user, essentially to protect his own life. What does it say about the Guyver unit itself, though? Is that something that's programmed in? I mean, it's never explained in the manga, as far as I know, that there's a self-defense mode when the creators use it. Is the self-defense mode only available to the humans? And why specifically to the humans? Is it because there's an evolution of consciousness when a human merges with a Guyver unit?
Does it create a secondary layer of consciousness or something?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So many ideas, so many great ideas that could be played with. You can actually read the rest of the manga online if you look for it. I've actually decided to start reading it again this week. So I'm going to read.
I'm going to be honest, this conversation is making me very considerate as well.
I would recommend watching Dark Hero, the film, first. And then, to be honest with you, I think you'd get some enjoyment out of it. I would recommend it. But yeah, I have actually got access to the manga completely now. So I'm actually reading the paper stuff first. It's not something I can sit and read in one go. It's very simple, really. It's, early on especially. But yeah, it's out there, mate. So if you want, I'll send you a link if you want to read it, because I want to. Over the years, I sort of checked back in just to see where the story's going and see how it's happening. Just, why it's never been translated into English in its entirety. Well, it can only mean one thing, It's not popular enough. I mean, for example, Viz in the 90s, they translated and published Fist of the North Star. And they did 4 volumes of that, and they stopped.
Was that due to lack of support?
I imagine so. Now they're doing it again, and they're up to volume 9.
Okay.
I've been buying every single one.
I will be honest. Fist of the North Star has kind of grown in cult status.
I'm on volume 9 right now. There's 15, and I have yet to discuss it on the pod. I considered discussing it today, but I just thought, no, not yet.
We'll come back to that. I mean,
yeah,
I'm
a big fan of
86 so
films,
much
especially
iconic stuff that's attached to that for me.
But that's what I'm saying. Is it a popularity thing? I don't know. Something that I remember discussing with Glenn when I was a kid. So I always wanted a Guyver video game. Do you remember? Did I ever tell you this idea of mine? Do you remember the Capcom Aliens versus Predator side-scrolling beat-em-up?
Yes.
To set the scene,
it had 4 characters. Yeah,
that's right. You had what is essentially Dutch from Predator 1, some random anime girl, and 2 predators, and they would be basically fighting a screen full of alien sprites.
Yeah.
And imagine that with a Guyvers and Zoanoids. I mean, that would be incredible. A side-scrolling beat 'em up with Guyvers and then the screen full of Zoanoids. It'd be perfect. And it'll never happen. Sadly, because as far as I know, well, I've looked, maybe I'm wrong. No one knows anything. No one knows what's happened.
It's all conjecture, but nothing more.
Yeah, I've heard about illness. I've heard he stopped making the manga simply because he wanted to earn proper money. You
It's
know?
just reasonable for anyone
Yeah.
to create an IP.
Yeah. I mean, considering the ideas, I don't know. Apparently, when Dark Hero was released, and as I mentioned earlier on, there's a guy with Zoanoid, he was frustrated because it was an idea he was saving for himself. The Guyver becoming gigantic and then exceedingly gigantic, I imagine he envisioned, because gigantic heroes fighting gigantic monsters is common in Super Sentai shows and whatnot. You know, Ultraman becomes gigantic at some point. I imagine a lot of these ideas he envisions.
I
At
mean,
some
there are
point
some
happening.
shows that have taken that to ludicrous levels. I mean, there's one anime that I've watched called Top of Tengen Go and Lagan.
Yeah.
Which it starts off with a character that gains a mech that's about 7 or 8 foot high. And by the end of the series, he's got a mech that's so large, it's picking up galaxies and throwing them like shurikens.
Yeah.
And I mean, the concept is something that's existed in anime for a long time. It's deep in the cultural memory of manga that mechs and that sort of thing are a significant aspect. But the concept of the gigantic Guyver, I always liked that. I don't know why. It was.
Well, I say, like, there's two versions of it. There's a slightly bigger, harder super version with the massive, like, the slight design change. And like I said, it's like a suit, an extension that a Guyver can call to a Guyver. So in the manga, there's this actual really good storyline where Sho and Agito, Guyver 1 and Guyver 3, are fighting psychologically for the gigantic Guyver unit. Whoever has the strongest will calls it. And because Agito is so strong-willed, so single-minded, so just selfish and resolute in that selfishness, he starts to dominate the Guyver Gigantic and starts taking it away from Sho. At one point, Sho is fighting with the gigantic Ava and it comes off him, and the Gato calls it to him. So that part of the narrative becomes about Sho trying to regain his assertiveness, his self-assertiveness, so that he can start calling the gigantic Guyver himself, you know.
Yeah.
And then I'm pretty sure Agito then manages to build his own gigantic Guyver extension armor, and then later on is when we get the Exceed, when he becomes even bigger, which I can't remember how it happens, but yeah, it just goes on and on and on. But you know, it's funny, you know, we've talked about anime series, TV series, books that just go on forever and never end, or end before they end. And this is a prime example of it. This is a franchise that, to men/boys of a certain age, is extremely dear to them. You know, if you go on any Facebook group that is dedicated to 80s/90s anime, you'll get people who just talk about the Guyver all the time. They love it, and they're so passionate about it. And there's never been any more. You know,
There's something pure about the concept. I can
Well,
see why it resonates. So.
it's yeah. As I say, it's that same purity as Spider-Man, isn't it? You know, you can admire the cool designs. The Guyver itself looks fantastic. It is like a great evolution of the Kamen Rider insectoid armor design, isn't it? You know, it's a great evolution of that. I used to draw it so much when I was a kid. I could draw it without even looking at a picture at one point. I just draw it so much. And, you know, but I do think it's the human elements of the story that is what makes people feel so passionate about it, is because you do care about the characters. I mean, it goes on so far that, I mean, what can you imagine in Volume 40 when they got gigantic armors and whatever and spaceships? What use are Mizuki and Tetsuo at that point in the narrative? Are they just there for moral support? You know, Sho's best friends.
At that point, it becomes like Yamcha in Dragon Ball Z,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
you know, I don't know. But early on, anyway, like, I think you do care. I always remembered the episode where in the anime series, which is different to the manga, where the Hyperzonoid Team 5 attack the school. And that was always such a power fantasy for me. That is what always made me love the Guyver, because I used to daydream about being a Guyver unit, when I was a kid, and like
sat in class.
yeah, it's
imagining-
just
yeah.
even though the idea of it is quite horrific, really, when you think about it, because I was just that angsty, that angsty.
We've all been there, man. It's fine.
I wasn't interested in being Spider-Man. I wanted to be a Guyver. I wanted a tentacle monster inside of me. And my God, whoever did it first, whoever did it first, yeah.
Oh wow, I'm reading that in more than one level, man. I'm sorry.
I know what I said. I know what I said after
and you stand by it.
I stand by it. I stand by it. And I want to just sorry. Well, this segment's gone on too long now. I could talk about the guy forever, as you probably realise by now. There is the final point I want to make. Yeah, I don't know who did it first. I saw it first in Guyver. We want to talk about head beams. You want to talk about gravity Hadoukens. You want to talk about giant chest atomic bombs. None of that compares, to having high frequency blades on your elbows. That is the coolest thing ever.
That was very cool. I will be honest.
There's something about the way that he fights with his elbows that is just so amazing. I have wanted to replicate that in my own characters and my own art so many times, and every time I do it, I'm like, no, this is just the Guyver. I can't. I just can't. I just can't.
It was a concept I hadn't seen before anywhere, and it looked
time,
immensely cool.
Oh, something so amazing about it. High frequency blades on your elbows, slashing people up. Watch Dark Hero, Mark.
Oh, if I may, before we draw this to a close.
Wait. For the love of God.
Fair enough.
You must watch Dark Hero to see how he uses those blades. There are some really clever ways he uses the blades. Some very clever ways. So you really should watch it. I'd love for you to watch it, and then we do a quick talk about it on an episode, actually. Because
certainly,
I've talked about it so much today. We don't need to do much more about it. So, what was you going to say?
Okay, well, this is a final little point. It's not so much related to the Guyver, but it was all in reference to the fact that you had those VHSs that had the Guyver on them. Now, one thing that sings out to me from my childhood more than anything else, and I assume that they were on these videos as well, was the manga trailer that used to show before.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want to give a little shout out to that trailer. That lives rent free in my head. Like every now and again, I throw it up on YouTube, just because just watching that little 2-minute burst of mixture of 90s anime. That I don't understand why it is that lives so much.
Because it was the beginning of every fucking tape, and you saw it a million times. And because the song, which is "The Heart Beneath" by Celtic Frost, I know that off by heart. I am into Celtic Frost, and when I discovered it was by Celtic Frost, I was like, "What?" Incidentally, the
yes
is the
What's
best.
Happening? What's happening?
It's the best bit of the song. So
it's just got a quick smash cut of every single awesome moment from every single major anime at the time, and I love that trailer. It is literally the best sort of. I don't have a term for it because it's not technically a trailer. It's more of just a statement of the company, really.
It's very cool.
Yes, it is.
Anyway, we should draw this segment to a close. We will trying to think of a clever way to send you or bring up the break, but right now I can't. But anyway, let's hit a break, and when we come back, I'll be listening to Mark discuss Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders. So we'll be right back.
All right, my dude.
Yeah. Be right back.
Okay, so welcome back, and we're now entering our second segment for the podcast. This is going to be my retrospective, I suppose it'd be, of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders. So, this is one that Gav introduced me to in my childhood. And
did I?
Yeah, you did, man.
What happened?
Well, one day you turned around and said, more or less, you turned around at one point and said, "You've heard of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure?" And the rest was history.
It's what I tend to do.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think because I want to actually. Do our 20s count as childhood? I'm pretty sure it was
No,
early 20s. I'm pretty sure it was early 20s.
I will be honest. It's the I know that the series that we watched wasn't actually complete until 2002. So yeah, you're right. That would probably put us in our very early 20s. Well, as I said, Stardust Crusaders is the third run of a show created by Hirohiko Haruki. He had the previous series serialized in manga format in Weekly Shonen Jump, and this series was released in April of '89 through to April of '92. So it was actually released quite a while before they completed the animation. Now, prior to this, you also had two previous runs, and all of these stories revolve around the Joestar family. Initially, it's a story where in every single run they change the main character, which it's going to focus on, and it builds up in a story that's going to be honest, it's dripping with machoism. It's to the point where it's almost comical, but it's still immensely entertaining. It is a very, very entertaining show to watch. Now, it starts off back in Victorian times with the series of Phantom Blood, which has a character called Jonathan Joestar, whose family, he comes from a very prestigious family, adopts a young boy called Dio Brando. And this is the start of something that is rife throughout the entirety of this run, is that the writer likes to put in as many references as possible to music, mainly, among other things, and he constantly has characters that have names that seem downright strange. I mean, later on I'll make reference to characters like Vanilla Ice and the like. And these are characters that it can seem a touch jarring at first, I will be honest, but it's become part of the charm of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I mean, in later runs you have characters like Sex Pistols and Aerosmith. So he fully leaned into it by that point. Now, in this story, Dio Brando ends up turning evil, for want of a better term, but due to the fact that he comes into contact with a stone mask that turns him into a vampire. This results in him going to war with his adopted brother, and the two of them fight, and it eventually builds up to an epic battle taking place on a paddle steamer that's crossing the Atlantic, by which point Dio's actually become decapitated and is attempting to steal his brother's body in order to survive. Then we move to the next one. This would be Battle Tendency, where we drop to Jonathan Joestar's grandson, Joseph Joestar. Now, this guy's a personal favourite of mine in this series. I like Joseph. I think he... Okay, I'm not going to start ranting now. I'm going to calm down first. Joseph Joestar is a man's man. It's a set just before World War II. And it's the story of him fighting his own assorted villains in the form of Kars, Wamu, and Asidisi. And I'm not going to go into too much of the detail here. It's just very interesting. It's a globe-trotting adventure which involves him going to sort of different places, includes the likes of Venice and Rome. And at one point, he crashes a Nazi plane into a volcano. It's just very over the top, very interesting. It's got an Indiana Jones quality to it, complete with martial arts and more than a touch of the supernatural. Now, at the end of this adventure, after he's attacked said volcano with said plane, the volcano responds in kind by erupting and launching him and the big bad of this series into space on a rock. Whilst in orbit, the big bad drifts off into space, changing to stone and being forced to drift forever on the cosmos, losing his consciousness, whilst Joseph falls back to Earth. And to most men, this would be a death sentence, but Joseph, this barely slowed him down. He was eventually nursed back to health by a woman called Susie Q, who he eventually married and gave birth to a woman called Holly. Now, Holly went on to have a son called Jotaro Kujo. And one trend you might start to notice in all of these characters is all of them have those two letters, Jojo, in their names. And that's where the title of this show comes from. That despite the fact the characters change, all of them have this commonality between them. At this point, we come to Stardust Crusaders. The end of the previous run actually ends with Joseph getting ready to go to Japan because his grandson needs him. And this is where I came in on the show initially. Now, appreciate that there's been all that backstory, all these events had taken place, and I started watching it at the beginning of the third run because there wasn't anything animated prior to that. It was only in manga format. So all these stories about how Dio, for instance, who at the beginning of this becomes successful in obtaining Jonathan Joestar's body, actually attaches his head and becomes a new big bad for this run. And then goes on to manifest a new ability, a thing called a stand. And in doing so, triggers stands in other similar people across the world, predominantly with people of the Joestar bloodline. And I will be honest, the stands are something that make this. They are something that I think everyone remembers the most when it comes to this show, isn't it?
It's definitely when the manga and the show, anime, I suppose, if you're in that regard. To me, it's more of a manga, I suppose. It's definitely when it finds its identity, because the first 2 seasons, despite volumes, despite the various like weird characters and references and martial arts and ideas, it's all quite, I suppose, in comparison at least, grounded. It's a bit more grounded than what comes later. The stands add like a supernatural element to it, but also a creative sketchbook, I suppose, that he's able to fill with tons and tons of ideas that he's able to play out in the story. It adds so much potential, doesn't it, for creativity?
It's a very distinctive look as well.
Yes.
I mean, with regards to this show, it's something that I hadn't necessarily seen before in terms of an anime. And to be honest, I was still quite young in my experiences with anime at that age. So I'd say that age. I mean, this show.
I'm pretty sure, right? We were about 20 odd.
Yeah, I believe we would have had to have been.
Yeah, because when we first discovered it, because the manga wasn't translated in English at this point.
No.
I have the complete run of the original Viz translation still physical, and that was a few years after that, I am sure. So
it's something I obtained via scans online myself at some point later on down the line and read. I can't tell you exactly when, but I mean, with this show, this is one that's got the strange quality of the fact that that entire 13 episode run that went into it was made at 2 very different times, and it was made back to front. With episodes 8 to 13 being made on November 21st, 93 and to November 18th, 94, whilst the first 7 episodes were made on May 25th, 2000 through to January 25th, 2002.
This is where we discovered it. So, can I just interject here and explain to you how I discovered JoJo's Bizarre Adventure?
Certainly.
Because it's actually not through the anime at all. I discovered JoJo's Bizarre Adventure through the Capcom 2D one-on-one fighting game of the same name.
I see.
Yes. So Capcom, obviously known for Street Fighter series, they originally developed like the Street Fighter series on an arcade machines on an arcade board, which was codenamed the CPS series. And they had the CPS 1 series, CPS 2 series, and basically, as each arcade board was developed, so improved became the quality of the animation and the amount of animation frames, let's say. I mean, if you look at Street Fighter 1, and then look at Street Fighter Alpha, the difference is incredible. So, and then when Capcom then develops the CPS 3 arcade board, the level of animation quality was jumped astronomically. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, as was released on this board today, is still viewed as a watermark in 2D video game animation. It just looks incredible. And so it was around this time, I want to say Street Fighter 3 originally came out in 1997, and then it was probably, which I believe it was the first game on the CPS 3 hardware, not 100% sure. And then between that and then the final release, which was Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Capcom released JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the one-on-one fighting game. Now, the reason why I chanced upon this, I had heard of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
I mean, that title alone is confusing. When you hear it, you're like,
Exactly. It's just it sticks in your mind. It's I knew that it was a manga that had been around for a long time. I don't not as long as Fist North Star, but a long time. Maybe not. Who knows? No. I'm pretty sure Fist North Star was first. And at the time, I had discovered emulation, and I was downloading arcade ROMs on my computer just to test random games out. And at the time, CPS-free games had yet to be emulated. You could not download these games yet because they hadn't cracked it yet. And so I desperately wanted to play these games because I'd read about them and whatever. And that's when I bought a Dreamcast. And at the time, the Dreamcast was the only way to acquire most of these rare fighting games. And so I bought tons and tons of them. The Dreamcast was actually a great machine for fighting games. A sequel to one of your personal favorites, Mark, Project Justice, which is a sequel to Rival Schools. Remember those days?
I did love Rival Schools, man.
Yeah, it's on Dreamcast, and whatever. There's just so many great fighting games on it. Anyway, so I would probably say that fighting games are my favorite genre, and this was 20 years ago now, easily. And I was just desperate to try any fighting games, especially by Capcom. And I was finally able to acquire these games that never got released anywhere else. And then, that's when I tried JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as a fighting game. And it was mind-blowing. Great animation. It covered the story. I can remember the arcade mode played the story out, but I had no idea.
No, it must have been very condensed by comparison.
It was, yes, but not to spoil what you're about to reveal, but lots of the great imagery that comes from Stardust Crusaders in the game. Almost anything you could name, almost anything. When you start discussing your favorite scenes from the anime/manga, I guarantee I'll go, that's a special move for a character. It was so well designed. But an interesting little factoid for you as well is that while Capcom made a fighting game based on Stardust Crusaders using a similar engine to Street Fighter itself was heavily influenced by JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Heavily influenced. A ton of characters copied ideas. Straight off the top of my head, Guile, is copied from the. What is his name?
Polnareff.
No. There's another character. It's not Polnareff. I'll Google it very quickly. I did have it up a minute ago, and I was really going, "Oh, make sure you bring that up." This is great podcasting. Oh no, okay. I'm looking it up, and they're saying it is based on Jean-Pierre Polnareff.
Yeah.
I thought it was the other. I thought it was the soldier. Actually, there's a soldier in season 1 or 2, a German soldier or something. Anyway, a character that is really, really, really prominently inspirational to Street Fighter is the character of Lisa from the second volume, who inspired Rose, and it's very clear, very, very, very clear. But so I discovered the game, loved the game, was fascinated by the ideas in it, and then that's when I discovered what you are discussing now, the 1993 adaptation of the back end of the story. So strange they did it that way around, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to try and cover all 13 episodes because that is... I managed to watch that complete, if I remember correctly. I actually watched it from the start.
I definitely watched the last half first. Definitely. And then I watched the first half later. I can't quite remember who or why or how, but I definitely remember it going that way. Definitely. So if you watched it all the way through, then I must have been in a good mood to have the patience to do that, because while it is cool that you get the setup, I kind of prefer the animation and the action in the second half. But anyway.
When you say the second half that were released, or the second half of the series?
The second half of the series.
Well, as I say, the story itself it's an interesting one. It's very much another globe-trotting story with much more of a focus this time compared to the previous, wherein you've just got a bad guy. This one has a bit more of a ticking clock in it, due to the fact that when the stands manifest in all these different characters, and some of these stands are very interesting to learn about. It's one of the things that continues to interest when you're watching the show, is every fresh face has got the potential to have some new interesting aspect, and this show never comes straight out and tells you what someone's capable of. It drip feeds you the information. So for instance, to begin with, we meet Jotaro Kujo that's locked himself in a prison cell at the police station because he's petrified of the abilities that have suddenly manifested. I say petrified doesn't seem like the right word really for Jotaro, does it?
No, he's kind of laying down in the cell, nonchalant, just like relaxing with his arms behind his head and his feet up.
I feel I did him a bit of a disjustice there.
Yeah, you kind of did. Yeah, he kind of he does everything in his stride. You know.
I mean, he is the definition of stoic and heroic. I mean,
Yeah.
this guy. I mean, I was looking into his design, and apparently he was developed with Clint Eastwood in mind.
I'm not surprised by that.
In that kind of like the silent, constantly staring sort of protagonist.
Well, that kind of like protagonist concept is very, very typical in Japanese literature, though. You know, to kind of go a bit off kilter right now.
No, go for it.
For example, the much maligned Metroid Other M video game, which is Metroid is a series where the video game series where the main character is silent, and they never really, to a degree, gave the main character Samus Aran any characterization ever, because she was some protagonist and a cipher for the player. And when the time came for them to finally give her characterization, they did the same thing as for what is being discussed now. She became silent, or not silent per se, but very stoic, very serious, yes, and it made her unlikable to the West and annoying, unreachable, let's say. And in Japan, those traits are viewed as strengths. You know,
it's much more fair. We like our superheroes to wisecrack and drop one-liners before they dispatch the bad guy.
Well, I wouldn't say that's necessarily what anyone would want Samus Aran to do. To be fair,
coming out of like 80s action heroes and all that.
But I guess it just depends, doesn't it? Like I said, the thing about this series, Jonathan in part 2, isn't it? Right?
Oh, that's Joseph in part 2.
Joseph, isn't it? Joseph, as a young man, is like a wisecracker. He's a bit crazy.
He's a lot more cocky. Yeah.
Yeah. He gives the show so much character because of his personality. He's almost annoying.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's kind of why I love him. I don't know why.
I'm with you there. Yes, you can complain about the penchant for constant exposition in Japanese storytelling, whether it's translation or not. It is incredibly annoying, in my opinion. And yes, he is constantly talking about what he's about to do and while he's doing it. He's telling you what he's doing, blah, blah, blah. But he's funny while he's doing it. And I think that, with each series, the writer, the artist, the creator, was just trying to like switch things up, wasn't he? And I think that Jotaro was a natural evolution of protagonist change, let's say, from the previous one. Because let's be honest, the cast of characters in this volume is huge, and if the protagonist is a bit quieter, a bit more in the background, but it does actually make sense of his characterization overall in the story, very much so, because he's cold and calculating, and he's a deep thinker, isn't he? He's smart, but he doesn't need to show how strong he is until he has to. Let's just say,
Very few of his battles are won through overwhelming force. It's smarter than that.
Yeah, which is one of the things I always liked about the show, actually. It's not just, monster of the week, villain of the week, punch, destroy. There's often a thought process that goes through the defeat of said villain. There are abilities that need to be countered, as I was just about to say, because there is a group, isn't it? It's an ensemble cast, and they're all so different from each other with varying personalities that if Jotaro himself is a bit more muted, it's not to the detriment of the narrative overhaul,
No.
Because of how big the other personalities are. And my God, they're big.
And often it is interesting to see how those personalities bounce off him.
Absolutely. Off each other as well.
Yeah, we will certainly get into that. I think there's a couple of character conflicts which always led to immense entertainment.
It's great. Yeah, it's fantastic.
But getting into the actual stands themselves, just to explain what they are. The stands are manifestations of ordinarily anthropomorphic figures that stand behind the person and lend them abilities, and often can influence, but only other stand members can actually witness and see these manifestations. To normal people, it would just appear to be almost like ghost-like activity. For instance, in the first episode alone, he takes a gun and holds it to his head, pulls the trigger, and his stand stops the bullet, even though there's an inch or two from the barrel to his temple. And to the policemen that are watching, all they see is a bullet fired out of a gun, and it just hovers in midair next to his head.
Yes.
Whilst to his grandfather, who is also manifested a stand, he sees this figure standing behind him with its hand outstretched, holding it between two fingers. And this figure is what becomes known as Star Platinum. Now, every stand has certain attributes which it excels in. It's often reflective of the character that they've manifested with. It takes aspects of their personality and exaggerates them, for want of a better word. And for Jotaro, it's his Star Platinum excels in strength, speed, and precision. Those are the specific things which you do see put to great effect at later times. Now, this is where I'm going to start to rant a little bit, because then we come back to Joseph. Because Joseph has manifested a stand, and I think we started to get into this rant last time, didn't we?
Well, let's just reiterate as well, like how fun and how strong he is. In the end, in Volume 2, he is the main character. He is the over-the-top wisecracker. He is powerful, despite the fact he obviously meets enemies that are stronger than him and has to train with Lisa as well.
Yeah.
And gradually develops Hamon, which is the martial art, isn't it?
That's the sunlight-based martial art to fight against vampires. Yeah.
Yes. Over the course of the show, and in the end, he is the big guy, the big strong guy.
The motherfucker got punched into orbit
Yeah.
by a volcano, and he came back and he survived. Like, it's to this that it pisses me off that they kind of just gave him an exposition ability.
Yes.
So he got Hermit Purple. And this is manifested by a bunch of vines that grow from his body. So his isn't anthropomorphic, unfortunately. It just wraps itself around any type of media that can create imagery. So you're talking cameras, you're talking televisions, anything like that. And it will create an image of whatever they need to know in order to move the plot forward. Now, that part always rankled me a little bit. I'm going to be honest. I feel that something better could have been done for him on that one. But he does somewhat utilize it better later on, wherein he can use it to web sling. Yeah, and he learns to manifest his Hamon through the vines. So that is something, I suppose, in that regard. But
he gets the short end of the stick in terms in terms of ability design. It's almost like he couldn't think of anything else. I mean, did they even need to be tentacles? I almost feel like it could have been just some fellow with glasses and a moustache. It goes, instead, do you know what I mean? Instead of tentacles.
Be the hermit. I know.
It could have been. It definitely could have been more than what he got, but I don't know. It's like a small blemish, really, on an incredible range of creativity.
Yeah. Well, my annoyance with this didn't occur whilst I was watching the show.
It's after watching. Yeah,
I read the manga, and I started with like, holy shit, Joseph is a fucking badass.
Yeah,
and then coming back to the show and thinking, oh no. I mean, I get the end of the day, the whole point is meant to be a passing of the torch. They need to move it on to the next generation. That is what every subsequent JoJo story is all about, is moving the story forward, showing how, I don't know if cursed is the right word, but destined this bloodline is. It's just they are destined to be constantly put through trials like this. And in this story, what happens is when they actually manifest the stands and the people of the bloodline do actually start to exhibit these abilities, Jotaro's mother, Holly, starts to manifest vines and roses growing around her body. That's slowly killing her because she is not capable of handling this sort of power. It knocks her into a coma, and they realize that this has all been triggered by Dio. Now, they manage to start tracking down Dio. They start to investigate as to where it is they can find him. And along the way, they start to grow a small band of allies. The first of which is Avdol, who comes with Joseph to the prison to meet Jotaro. Now, he's got the stand Magician's Red. And that stand, I mean, I believe it is some form of muscular eagle or falcon
Yeah,
or something.
he
So
is. He is buff.
yeah, and his attributes are more fire based. So he has all manner of attacks that are pretty much intent on burning you in all different kinds of ways. And he's the first person that pretty much stands up to Jotaro, isn't he? They make a challenge where Jotaro says, "I'm not going to leave this cell," and he turns and goes, "I'll make you leave this cell." And
yeah.
a classic anime standoff that ends with neither of them looking weaker, but an acknowledgement of strength from both parts. Now, moving forwards, I mean, at this point, you actually discover that Jotaro is a high school delinquent. Now, I'm going to be honest. I mean, when that was said to me, like he's in high school, I was like, nah, no fucking way. I mean, this man is like 6'6". He looks like he's in his early 20s, and he looks like he's lifted every day of his goddamn life. But nonetheless, it's the case. And also, as most shonen characters are, if he didn't have these adventures going on, I'm sure he'd have his own harem of women and have his own slice of life adventures in his school, because it seems to be attracted to by every woman that's in this school. And it's here that he meets the first antagonist, so to speak, which is Noriaki Kakyoin. Am I pronouncing that right? Kakyoin?
Kakyoin.
Kakyoin.
That's how they pronounce it in the anime. Well, I just remember it. Kakyoin!
And Kakyoin has Hierophant Green as his stand, and he attacks Jotaro, even. And I always remember that Emerald Splash in terms of an attack. But Hierophant Green is a little bit more stealth-like in terms of his attack. He's a lot more subtle, and he's a lot more about surveillance and long-range attacks rather than getting in dirty with his fists. And they have an episode which is dedicated to the two of them having an extensive fight, at which point it becomes apparent that Kakyoin isn't actually an enemy. He's under control due to a parasitic bud of flesh, I believe they refer to it as, isn't it? That's embedded just in his forehead that's taking control of him. Now, due to Star Platinum being able to remove it, he ends up joining the team, and away they go. Now, other characters come in throughout the series, and I'm going to hit a couple of them because I feel I'd be doing the show a disjustice if I didn't. And one of the biggest ones is Jean-Pierre Polnareff.
Yes. Oh,
my man, Silver Chariot. He is.
Absolutely love this guy.
Yeah,
absolutely love this guy. He probably has the most pronounced arc in the show, or in the story, if you can call it that. This is the character who definitely starts in one place, goes to other places, and then ends up in somewhere completely different at the end. And I definitely find him quite irritating intentionally. He's intentionally irritating, arrogant, isn't he? Almost cliched to the core, because he's French as well, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe it would be viewed perhaps as a little bit racist today. Personally, as an Englishman, able to laugh at such things, including jokes aimed at my own nationality's expense. It is cliched. It is a little bit archetypical, but the character's endearing in the end. As I said, he goes through such a great arc.
Oh, he has some of the best moments in this show.
He does, definitely.
For comedic and action. It's both of those. He absolutely nails it into certain measures. I mean, at first, when I started to understand what his story was, I did feel that he was a bit of a rip-off of Inigo Montoya.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that he's hunting for the man with two right hands that killed his younger sister.
Yes.
And that's Inigo right there. And getting aside from the fact that Silver Chariot is an armored character, a stand that stands behind him in full suit of armor with a rapier.
Yes.
It's every element of that is almost, but then I realized it's more homage. It's not meant to be a straight off rip-off. It is an acknowledgement of a very cool character in previous media that they wanted to see represented in their own, but they didn't go out and out. They just enough. Now, these characters form the main base of the group, and they are eventually joined by another character. Which is a
character that dwarfs them in personality and and effect on the narrative.
Absolutely, Iggy. Who's it? Boston Terrier.
His
And
introduction is just absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Where
yeah,
he jumps out of the helicopter, doesn't he, in the desert? They meet him in a spot out of the desert, right? Is that right?
I believe so. Yes, it's like the entrance
Yeah.
is built up as if they're getting like the best support, aren't
Yeah,
they?
yeah, yeah. He does it. Yeah. Oh,
And then when he actually manifests his stand, because it turns out that stands aren't limited to humans,
mhm.
and this gets represented one or two other times in this run as well. He gets the stand of the Fool. Now, his stand is predominantly based in dust and sand, which sounds somewhat weak when you first say it, but when you see the application by which he can utterly brutalize people, you realize that, dear God, is it terrifying. When he actually wants to focus on somebody, he is probably stronger than any of the other characters. Now, the interactions through these characters is the main source of entertainment for this show. The fact that Polnareff and Iggy, I think they rarely, if ever, get along. I understand that Iggy's got a certain addiction to coffee chewing gum, off the top of my head. Was that right?
Something like that.
Yeah, and he doesn't like it if anyone touches his chewing gum. So,
And he likes eating hair and farting in people's faces, right?
yeah, no, he does. And that makes this show sound so crude, but
Specifically Polnareff.
yeah. I will be
The-
honest,
the-
Polnareff
the-
is responsible for a lot of the conflict between characters, isn't he?
He
Really?
is, yes. He is. That's what makes him so fun, though,
Yeah.
because he has got such an extreme personality. You know, Avdol is very austere, isn't he? And prim and proper, and the serious. And Jotaro, as we say, is distant and aloof. And Joseph is. He's like the leader, isn't he? He's like, we've got to do the mission. We've got to do the mission. It's all he cares about. It's all he cares about. Kakyoin has like his redemption arc, doesn't he? And he's sort of in debt to them,
Mhm.
and so they need someone to sort of kick up the conflict. Let's say, create the conflict within the core cast. And yeah, Polnareff is that one because he does come across as arrogant and annoying, and Iggy most certainly takes offense to his arrogance immediately.
I will be honest. There are so many moments in this show when I straight belly laughed,
Yeah.
purely due to the interactions. And one thing you may be noticing about all of these stands that they're manifesting is that they're named after tarot cards from the major arcana. And that is a trend that continues for the most part throughout this run, but then also other characters start to rise with stands named after Egyptian gods. And it was always very interesting to sometimes be told the name of a character and just see if you could try and work out how it is that character would manifest. Now, for instance, one of the first recurring antagonists that truly goes against them is Whole Horse, who was also known as Emperor. Now, his stand is actually manifested in the form of guns, with bullets that he can steer and turn. And yeah, some of those fight sequences involving him, when you first start to understand what it is he's capable of, this is one of those shows that's, as Gav was saying, it's not about punch, 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 and you're down. This had moments that were literally fractions of a second where you see a character analyze and understand someone's ability and then learn how to counter it. And there's something immensely satisfying about that kind of fight sequence. I mean, I appreciate that the thought process these people are having would probably take several minutes to process, but you kind of give it that suspension of disbelief when you're watching it because it is interesting to see that breakdown and see them thinking it out and working out how to counter.
It's a hallmark of the overall saga, isn't it? That all of the previous show stars do it. They spend lots of time in their heads figuring out powers and whatever, figuring out how to counter other powers and etc., 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 and over-explaining it. But because of the nature of the abilities in this volume, the stand system, let's call it, it enables for a greater sense of creativity. We've all watched martial arts films, read martial arts books, mangas, whatever, where the martial arts are just like, he does this move, he does this move, I must counter. You know, it's been done to death. And,
Yep.
you know, and Araki does what he can, I think, to try and add a flair of originality to the martial arts. It's like, you heard of that martial arts horror film, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires? I wouldn't be. It's got Peter Cushing in it. It's an Asian film. I wouldn't be surprised if it was an influence on Jojo early on, to be honest with you. But it's martial arts, it's earth-shattering martial arts, and it's vampires. But there's only so far I can go, and like this stand system that he creates, which just enables so much more room for pushing ideas creating a world with rules that can be bent and broken repeatedly, but setting those rules and the weapons that exist within those rules and just placing them against each other and how they react to each other is always interesting. Some of the stands are worse than others. You know what I mean? Some of them are definitely brilliant. Some of them are fine because it does eventually take on a Monster of the Week format, if I remember correctly. They're on their way to find Dio, to kill Dio, so that they can stop the stands. And each episode / volume / issue of the manga, they are coming across a new stand user that Dio's sending against them, and each stand user has a different ability, and the team needs to use their abilities, their mixture of abilities, in a way to try and counter each new ability they come across, and that's where a lot of the smart writing comes along. I don't know if you were going to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up now. One of my favorite scenes in the whole of this series is with the villain Darby.
Oh, Daniel J. Darby. I was going to be getting to that.
You were,
yeah. No, carry on, man. No, absolutely. It's
he's, rather than it being a fight with fists, such as Star Platinum, who uses fists, and then the other characters' stands, which are basically based around violence of some kind, using elements and various abilities. This is a gambling character who can only be defeated by playing poker, and he has their souls, doesn't he? Each time he beats them in poker, he then has control of their souls, and one by one, the great, super powerful friend that they fall to him. And then who is it that wins? Is it Joseph in the end who does it? It is, isn't it? Because he plays Koi. Or was it Jotaro?
Jotaro beats him in a game of bluffing.
That's it, bluffing. That's right. Yeah, I knew it was one of them. Oh, yes, Joseph's the first one to go down because he just has a go, doesn't he? And then what it is Jotaro doesn't beat him through poker. That's right. He just upsets him, doesn't he? So much in the course of the game that Darby just literally mentally cracks in front of him, and it's actually like, if I remember correctly, a very early example of Jotaro's characterization. He is incredibly smart and resilient and thoughtful. Like, he's not like a super genius or anything, but pragmatic, I would say, is more like it. Just very good at analyzing situations and keeping a straight head and working his way out of them using thought and not acting rationally. And he literally outthinks this super powered gambler, by calling him Barbie. Doesn't he? And Darby can't believe it. But did he? Did he call me Barbie? And, it's just fantastic.
I noticed he was using his speed to constantly change things whilst they were playing. So,
of course,
holding a cigarette and then things like that. He was thinking, is he using his abilities to cheat? He wasn't sure.
Yes.
Good.
It's such a great piece of writing because, as I said earlier, there are these ideas, these pillars in the world with this combat system. Let's talk about like a video game, but a lot of manga is like that, I suppose. And he's looking at this system and looking at interesting ways to play around with it, to create the conflict, to create the action, to create the tension. And it just works so well. Oh, it's brilliant.
Yep, he was absolutely excellent. And I will be honest, the actual run that we watched, it was a greatly condensed compared to the original manga, because in the original, Darby actually had a brother, Terence T. Darby.
Oh, I can't remember. I haven't read the manga.
Oh, you understand, once I explain why it is they cut him out.
In 15 years or something like that. It's been years. It's the original Viz run, paperbacks, because now they're hardback, aren't they? And I've still got like all 16 volumes. I've been meaning to reread it, to be honest with you. I just haven't got around to it yet. It's been so long, so yeah, refresh my memory.
Well, whilst Darby had a Cyrus, and when he wins, he puts your soul into poker chips in games of chance with cards and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Terence T. Darby had the Egyptian god Atum, and he put souls into dolls, and his was based in computer games. And at that point, you realise that it is very much a retread of Darby's story in some regards. It doesn't. It's not as. I mean, having seen the Darby fight, I say fight for want of a better, the Darby conflict and confrontation, this one felt a little bit weaker when I read it in the original manga after I'd seen the show, and I realise now why they cut that one out. It didn't seem to gel as well as some of the other like fights.
Well,
So
they only had so much time, didn't they? It's only
yeah,
like what is the original? I'm pretty sure the 1993 one is like 6 episodes, and that's it.
yes,
And
uh,
then the 2004 prequel series is like 7 episodes, and that's
that's
it.
correct, man. Yeah,
Yeah, it's very tiny. It's tiny, absolutely tiny. So there's
it
only
is a very
they
condensed TV. Yeah,
they had to pick like the best bits, really.
and there are a couple of other like confrontations which will stay with me in terms of being exceptional. I mean, one was Endor, who had the stand Geb, and he was a water-based stand user, wherein he had just simply had control of water. Now he was actually blind. He sat a long way away. His range, he could attack people from kilometers away. But due to the fact that he was blind, he relied totally on sound. And this led to a great moment where you've got all the characters stood in the middle of a desert, unable to move because the water canteen just turned on them. and it was them slowly understanding his abilities bit by bit by using trial and error. I still remember Avdol taking his bracelets off and tossing them onto the ground to simulate footprints, so that he could play out a theory, and they could ascertain what it was that was capable of. It also led to one of the most comical things I've probably ever seen in animation, wherein Jotaro picks up Iggy with Star Platinum and full-on baseball pitches him a kilometer. Which is, yes, that is literally one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Now, there are a lot of other characters in this show. I mean, you have Enya, who had the stand Justice that's manifested in the form of a fog and could mind control people. And that was probably the best example when the team's being swarmed by mindless zombies, where you get to see Star Platinum's trademark move, which is where he shouts "Aura, Aura, Aura," which with a lot more passion and enthusiasm than I just did, and starts hurling an insane amount of punches at people. And I always love the scene in that town where he's surrounded by all these mindless drones who are swarming at him. And it's almost like that sequence, you know, in the classic samurai shows where the samurai would do like 4 or 5 sword strokes, then put the sword back into his hilt, but no one would move until it clicks. It has that moment when he's throwing the punches at them where you just see him just hammer out a load of punches whilst shouting "Aura, Aura." Then he pauses, then all of them explode away from him at once. And I always thought that was immensely cool. And her son turns out to be Jay Guile, who is the stand holder of Hanged Man.
Oh, yes, yes.
And this leads to quite possibly Polnareff's finest moment, where he finds the man who's responsible for his sister's death. And I always remember that sequence where the light was being reflected around in different people's eyes, because this stand user can travel through light, and he can attack from reflections. And this is another one of those fights where, for all intents and purposes, the villain seems indestructible. There's no possible way that you can attack him, and yet they use their intellect, they think about it, and they utilize the environment to find a way in which to defeat him. It's very, very interesting to watch. Now, all of this is building towards an eventual final confrontation with Dio. But there are still 1 or 2 aspects of the narrative that rubbed me a touch the wrong way, I will be honest. I mean, I know we're getting into spoiler territory at this point. We're starting
I think this is a spoiler podcast in general.
Yes.
In the end, we are like analysing and discussing plot in quite a lot of detail. I feel like, you know, you just shouldn't be listening to this podcast if you're worried about spoilers.
This is
not
true.
We're not, we know. So, yeah.
This is with regards to the character of Avdol. Now, Avdol initially, for as far as you understand, dies in the confrontation with Whole Horse, taking a gunshot to the forehead. Now, he then comes back later, and it turns out that the bullet grazed his skull, and he actually survived. And then a couple of episodes later, he gets killed for real by Vanilla Ice, who has the stand Cream, which always felt like a bit of a strange name to me for his stand, because his is just a spherical void of nothingness. He can just erase things. And he does this to Ragdoll. There's not even a moment of goodbye or anything. He's just gone. And there's something about that never felt right to me. That the whole kind of bait and switch of killing a character, nope, he's not dead. Oh, now he is dead.
I think
don't know.
that's like, if I'm honest, I think that kind of plot arc, let's say, is kind of born from the week-to-week nature of manga at the time. This was published in a shonen magazine, wasn't it? Maybe
Yeah.
Jump. I think it was Jump.
It was Jump.
Yeah. And one thing that I think sets this volume apart is that there is an end goal, isn't there? There is an overarching tension to the show, because you have the issue of the stands. They are all, the characters are strong enough to have stands. The villains are strong enough to have stands. But obviously, it's Jotaro's mother has been cursed with a stand and is dying. So there's that, conflict.
There's your ticking clock. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so the end of the story is reaching Dio and finishing it. So as you said, a ticking clock, whatnot. But still, while this does have that overarching, beginning, middle, and end, so to speak, I dare say he winged a lot of it still.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I dare say he must have winged it to a degree. But speaking of Vanilla Ice, I always thought Vanilla Ice was a really good character, good villain, good design.
Well, there's something about the way his head used to pop out of the void and things like that.
Yeah, it's so weird. And the
Very
stand itself,
sinister,
the stand itself is definitely, when you get to Vanilla Ice, despite his incredibly eccentric design, he's clearly a cut above all the stand users that have come before him so far.
Certainly, he's the dragon, I suppose, would be the best term for him, if Dio himself doesn't fulfill that, in terms of the strongest person who isn't the main bad guy.
Yes.
And it did make me chuckle a little bit. I didn't actually realise this until I was researching for this, but the reason I think that they called his stand cream was purely so they could have the term vanilla ice cream.
Yeah.
Whilst also having the two separate terms of vanilla ice and cream, which are both musical acts.
Yes.
So, yeah, I suppose to that end, he was an interesting character, and
I seem to remember there being implications of romanticism between him and Dio. Am I right? Was there
is some. I could see that. I mean, there are some levels of. I'm not going to say homoeroticism or anything on that sort of level, but there is a certain. Yeah, the machismo does go off the scale at times.
His design is crazy.
This is a story of manly men, and
many manly men.
Yes, and one thing I've always thought about the animation of this is that it's got a very strange. It's kind of borrows a lot from the older schools of anime, wherein people's physiques are exaggerated, they are muscular, but by the same token, they're very fluid.
It comes from the 80s, though, isn't it? Like in the end, his style has changed a lot over the years and become more modern. Because obviously JoJo's Bizarre Adventure still is being released today. But this era, I mean, when did it start? 89, yeah. So it started in the 80s. That was when all the masculine, manly men in shonens was still a thing, So it makes sense.
Yeah. Now, I think this brings us up to what would be coming in any story like this, that it is all about the good guys against the bad guys, and we come to the final confrontation between Jotaro and Dio.
You've forgotten something really important.
Oh, enlighten me, man.
Really, really important. We alluded to it. It's Polnareff's redemption arc, because Vanilla Ice kills Iggy. Right?
My apologies,
How could you forget this? This is like the biggest, most terrifying, awful death in the whole thing. How dare you?
No, sorry, man. You're right. I totally forgot.
How could you forget? This is.
Thing is, when I reflect back to that, all I can remember is that sequence of Iggy's stance hammering down a corridor towards him,
and then he dies.
Yeah.
It took a long time to deal with this. A long time to get over it. It was so depressing. I was so upset about it. Because Iggy does become an endearing character. in the end, yes, he is a bit disgusting, and he is a dog that doesn't say a single word in the entire show, but he shows bravery and respect for his compatriots, doesn't he? In the end,
Oh
and
yeah, he
he
becomes
saves.
part of the team, and
Exactly, and plus he's a dog, and we are, I am an animal lover, but also he's a dog, and there is great power in using in animals in narratives, because just in the same way that we as humans project ourselves into our pets, we also project ourselves into such silent style characters. We project our thoughts and reactions into Iggy. In the manga, in the anime, any version, it's all the same. And when Vanilla Ice, kills him, and it's quite horrific because it's dogicide, kills an animal. Like, come on, like
yeah.
who, this is brutal. For me personally, like, animal cruelty is worse than human cruelty. I cannot accept it. I hate it so much. I can't deal with it. It really bothers me.
Oh, it hits a nerve that
It just, yeah, because animals for the most part are defenseless creatures. Yes,
Mm.
Iggy's not defenseless. Fine, he is a stand-using monstrosity who just kicks ass and eats hair and farts in faces. He is a bit of an arsehole himself, but at the same time, he's still an animal. And
I think the thing about this death as well, the worst part about it was the abruptness of it.
yes,
It is literally, it's just one moment they're there and then gone, isn't it?
well, again, it's a very typical narrative device for to create tension and heighten the heighten the stakes, by having characters die. These characters have overcome all these other villains. Now we need to have a villain that's more powerful than all of them. What's the best way to illustrate that? Is to have the villain kill one of the main characters.
Yeah.
And obviously Avdol earlier on happens as well. Kakuin as well dies, and that's awful. That's awful because he uses his most powerful attack on Dio. Am I right?
Yeah.
And fails, and Kakuin is viewed as being quite together and strong all the way through. But anyway, we're talking about Iggy now. But what comes out of this, isn't it, is that Polnareff is deeply saddened by Iggy's death, isn't he? He is absolutely heartbroken, and as we know, Polnareff will go to the ends of the earth for revenge because he does it earlier in he does it for his sister, doesn't he?
Yes.
So when Iggy is killed, the absolutely unbeatable Vanilla Ice is Polnareff's next target. Am I right?
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, he has a certain abilities with his stand where it can lose its armor and he accelerates.
Mm-hmm.
And he just uses multiple lunges over and over again with its rapier. This is it. I mean, I'll say this. Polnareff is one of the characters in this show that you truly do see personality in more than any other. I mean, we were talking earlier on about the stoicism of Jotaro and the cockiness and also the drive of Joseph, but Polnareff was the most interesting to watch in this. You can't imagine the other characters getting the same sort of rage that comes from Polnareff.
That's it. He's an extreme character, isn't he? He has his pride broken repeatedly all the way through the show, not just by being beaten or winning fights or coming close or whatever, but also because the dog that he hated, who he grew to quite like in the end, is killed in front of him. And like I said, it's foreshadowing the fact that his method of his entrance into this story is a revenge plight in the first place. So
Yeah.
it is poignant, and it's Chekhov's gun being fired. That the moment one of a character he cared about dies, because there's the redemption arc of him caring about the dog in the first place because he really hated him, he will go to the end of the earth to kill Vanilla Ice. I can't quite remember how he kills Vanilla Ice. It's been a long time. Oh God, it's been ages. But yeah, it's great. It is absolutely great. Polnareff is the one to kill the dragon, so to speak, as you put it.
And then coming up to Dio, all the way through this show, you know that Dio is powerful, but they've managed to play it close to their chest as is what his stand is and what his abilities are.
Yes, that's one of the great mysteries of the show, isn't it? All the way through is what if you again, it's smart writing. You're getting all of these different stand users being thrown at the main characters, and they're defeating them sometimes unscathed, sometimes through sacrifice. They're defeating them one by one, and really but all the way through it, they're referencing what is Dio's power, and you have to ask yourself, what on earth is his power going to be? What is it going to be?
This is it. And they drip feed it to you a little bit in terms of like little hints of characters maybe trying to take a swing at him and then him manifesting his power, but not giving you enough of an understanding as to what just happened.
Mhm.
All you know is that he's untouchable. I believe there's one where, if I remember correctly, the whole horse tries to shoot him.
Yes.
And then he blinks, and then suddenly Dio stood behind him. And your first assumption in that situation is, oh, he has some form of teleportation or something. But you've seen that before in other characters. So you're still uncertain. You don't know how this is going to manifest until it's finally revealed that Dio has the stand of the world. And this is an ability that allows him to freeze time for several seconds. And this makes him nigh on unbeatable when they first come into contact with him and the fight begins. Now,
I say this is when Kakyoin is killed, isn't it? Right? Am I
yeah,
right? That's right.
he absolutely brutalizes the entire team for all intents and purposes until it does come down to just him and Jotaro. And this is a fight that there are key moments in this that are going to stay with me. I still remember that sequence where he has Jotaro down and he's approaching slowly. After all that's said and done, everything that's happened, the beatings have taken place and Jotaro is almost defeated. He's lying on the ground and Dio thinks he's beaten him, but he's not certain. And he's not going to be stupid. He's going to be carefully approaching because he knows that if he comes into range, Star Platinum would absolutely pulp him. And he listens. And you see that sequence of Star Platinum sliding his hand into Jotaro's chest and holding his heart and preventing it from beating, just so that he can't hear the heartbeat. And little touches like that take place. It's just the tension is through the roof by this point.
Yeah. Jotaro, who has proven to be, I don't think he's ever really put into any danger up until this point, is he? Well, not to this level, let's say. He's not put into the same level of danger where he's having to like fake his own death in the middle of a fight, you know. And he's unable to figure out, isn't it? Because even at this point, he's not too sure what Dio's ability is, right? The world is still not completely revealed. Yes, I'm sure.
He's still establishing and he's still observing it, but he hasn't quite worked it out yet.
Yes. Even in the middle of the climactic final battle, we still don't quite know yet. It's so good.
Yeah. And I'm not going to go into too much because I'm just in case anyone is intending to watch it based off of what we're saying. It's probably pretty obvious that the good guys preside over the bad guy. I mean, this is what these sort of stories are going to be leading towards at the end of the day. You know that it's all about a confrontation, it's all about a fight, but you also know there are multiple series following this, and this story is by no means complete. This is a story that's very much about that classic fantasy tale of a knight and his colleagues fighting a dragon, even if it is a different setting, and it's a somewhat unique one, to be honest. It's not one that I've seen. I mean, I've seen it done later in the same series wherein they take the same concepts, they rotate them and turn it into new things, but it's not one I've seen too much outside of this show. Okay, and as this leads into the ending, it's got friends who weren't friends to begin with, but have become brothers in arms, for want of a better term, during these fights. And I still remember this one sequence where you have Jotaro, Joseph, and Polnareff all stood in the airport, all with their arms around each other, hugging.
Yes.
And if it had been for the events prior, this would just look silly. It looked cheesy because they've all got grins on their faces. They've all taken down this enemy. But with everything that's come before, you understand it. It's a very touching scene.
They literally go through hell.
Yeah.
You know.
And they lose friends. And
yeah.
I mean, the team gets halved, more or less, by the time the show's ended.
Yeah.
And yeah, everything about this show stayed with me. I mean, I may have criticisms that I can levy at it, but that doesn't mean I don't love it. Now, it's a show that continued after this, or not so much the show, but the manga is certainly running to present day. I will say that I've read a couple of the series that followed, and some of them are very good. I mean, the next one was Diamond is Unbreakable. And that was the continuation of the story through Jotaro's nephew. And yeah, that was an interesting story as well. I mean, I do feel, though, that in later series, they start to over-explain the concept of the stands a bit too much. They
That's
start to
very
overcomplicate it.
well, yes. Yeah,
And
you can. Where do you go with that idea, though? Isn't it? The stand is like the iconic design of the series. Yes, you could be OG, edgelord, gatekeeper type person and say, "It's all about vampires and martial arts, blah blah blah." But that's not what made the series famous, is it? In the end, what made it famous is the stands. So in the end, I think it's perfectly natural to just overdevelop an idea until you can't develop it anymore and drive yourself insane doing it,
Yeah.
trying to come up with new ideas.
And this is the thing: is a lot of these stand developments are they're very convoluted and complicated. And once you've got this is because this was the first run, you could see the writer had some incredibly interesting ideas as to what stand users could do. He also had some very cheesy ones as well. But in later series, I think he starts to really exhaust his ideas. I mean, for instance, in one of the later ones, I believe it's Golden Wind, which actually follows, I believe it's the son of Dio. And in that one of the characters, Aerosmith, his stand manifests as a small fighter jet that flies around that he can control using a controller, and he can shoot people, and he uses it for reconnaissance.
That's very silly.
Yeah, it's things like that. Yeah, you can see that it's interesting to a degree in terms of reading it and stuff, but I don't know. I mean, any series, if it runs for too long, is eventually going to start to overstay its welcome.
I say that's one of the reasons why Stardust Crusaders is so good, in my opinion, because it had an ending in the end. It's the longest at this point as well of his works. Like, it's 16 volumes. That's very long. And it's 3 years. He did it in like 3 years. I'm pretty sure the previous volumes series are nowhere near as long. 152 chapters the whole thing is overall.
I see.
It's quite a lot.
No, I feel there is one that ran longer.
That's right.
And that's
Which
actually one of
a later one, is it?
Yeah, and it's one that's voted by the fans as being the best.
That's what I'm saying to you now. Up until this point, it's the longest running one.
Yeah,
the first two were much shorter.
Much shorter, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a much more recent one, which I've been saving it. I know I'm going to get into it at some point, but I haven't started reading it yet, which is Steel Ball Run.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people say it's the best one.
They do, and it's what I've heard, and it's I've looked at it, and it's one of those ones that I'm saving it for the right time, if that makes sense. I don't think I'm ready to get into it just yet. Mm-hmm. But it's one that's set prior to all previous stories set in the Old West. And it's all about a race across...
oh, yes. I've read about this. Yeah, I think it's good that he's gotten away from the established canon, actually. It's a good thing. Yeah, more room for creativity again. Yes, I've heard about this.
But one thing he can't help himself with is that he does always like to keep familiar names constantly recurring throughout the show. So, alongside the likes of Jojo, you get Zappelli and Speedwagon and concept characters and corporations like that are constantly recurring throughout to maintain that this is all the same universe. So, yeah, I mean, Jojo Bizarre Adventure is not my favourite anime. I'm not quite sure what is, but I know it's not Jojo. However, it is one that I still recommend wholeheartedly to anybody. It is a lot of fun to watch.
There was a time when I would put Stardust Crusaders in my top 3. There was a time.
Yeah.
In my favorite, I don't know. I kind of combine anime and manga together, I suppose. But yeah, it was definitely up there for me.
Well, it's one of those ones I'm not ashamed to recommend to somebody.
Yeah, it is strange in its own way. Yeah, it is strange in its own way. But 20 years ago when I watched the anime series, it was mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing, completely insane, completely crazy. Great characters. You can criticize Chitara for being incredibly two-dimensional, but fine, whatever. It doesn't matter because the rest of the characters balance it out.
Yeah.
In the end, Chitara is the main character, but it's an ensemble cast. That's irrelevant. It's the combination of personalities that makes it so endearing and so enjoyable. And also, obviously, as discussed, all the different powers and abilities and ideas that run through, the story. It absolutely just, blew my mind. And Iggy especially is such a memorable character. I reacted extremely to him. I can remember when I was younger showing the anime to people and saying, "You have to see this character, Iggy. You have to see this character, Iggy." But never mentioning that he's going to die, but knowing, and
Letting
then
them get that similar attachment.
everyone watching it, everyone I know who watched it, girlfriends at the time, other friends at the time watched it, and like were like, "No, Iggy, no." And then when Polnareff is like, going for revenge, it's like it just like elevates Polnareff's character so much, and it's just a great arc. It's a great, great arc, and that's just one element of the story. That's just one element of it, one thread that runs through it. It's great stuff. I've never read any of the others because I've never wanted to. If I'm honest, I've never
You
got
thought this
round
is a
to it.
complete story in its own right.
Not necessarily a complete story. I've just never had the urge to because I loved this series so much. I watched I watched the original, adaptations in anime form. Obviously, they were incomplete, so that's why I bought the manga immediately as soon as they started publishing it in English. I bought the whole lot over the few years. It took them a few years to release the whole lot, and this is before the current animated series that is ongoing, which is on Netflix, but has been going. It's not a Netflix series, but it's been going for a long time. I've not watched it myself, but
I would say the Netflix one does.
It goes
It's
further,
much more
I know.
extensive. It shows everything that's in the manga,
Yeah.
and it does fill out a lot of the
Everything.
in-betweens. Yeah,
I noticed that Volume 3, Stardust Crusaders, is very long. It's like
Yeah.
at least 27 episodes, the standard length, isn't it? So,
but aside from that, they're also covering the other sort of like runs as well. So you
But yeah,
do get.
I'm not sure why I've never felt the urge to keep going. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure. Just I don't know. I've heard people say maybe it's a reactionary thought process for me. Like online, I've read people say, "Oh, Stardust Crusaders is rubbish. This one's better. This one's better than later ones." They're talking about, and it makes you go, "Oh, go away. No need to be so, controversial." In the end, this is the series that made him as popular as he is today.
Yeah, this was his touchstone moment. Yeah,
exactly. There's a reason why, like, when people think of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, often the character that is put in their minds first is Jotaro.
Yeah, he is the definitive character of the entire JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, like the title.
Yeah.
I mean, as you say, he's the person I visualize when I hear that title.
Exactly. Before I even saw the show, I can still remember him in that school uniform with the hat that sort of melds into his hair.
Yeah, what the hell was with that?
He's been transformed into. He's been in the inspiration for so many characters and so many video games as well. Off the top of my head, there's the character Ban in Fighting Vipers, a Sega fighting game, very similar design. It's just everywhere, like the aura call.
Oh yeah, that's
it's
pastiche and homage.
I mean, I know that like Vampire's going is pre Stardust Crusaders, but Dio doing it, grabbing the truck and going, and then punching it. The Zawoldo, like it's become so iconic. It's become canon. It's a canon, anime / manga at this point, and an important one. To me, it is as important or as relevant and as canonical as Fist of the North Star or Akira or Battle Angel Alita or Nausicaa, or Appleseed. This goes on. The big ones. Maybe not so much today because obviously Naruto, One Piece, Bleach became even more successful, But someone of my age, when they think about the classic era, let's say,
coming from the days of Fist of the North Star and things like that,
pre-2000s is what I'm saying. Really, like it is as big as any of it to me personally. Maybe one day I'll get into the rest of it. Maybe I won't. I don't know. Maybe the games had something to do with it, So
I will say one final point to make on this. I feel this is a rather poignant one, but what in the actual fuck was it with making Jotaro become a marine biologist as well? I never understood that. Like literally,
well, it's to be honest, in Stardust Crusaders, it's never insinuated.
He has no interest, and then suddenly he goes and lives his dream of wanting to be a marine biologist. And they actually have that in the next one, that he is a successful marine biologist. And I know, that always got me.
Where dogs create sand monsters.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, that's where my suspension of disbelief just went. Oh no, I'm going to step out for a moment.
I don't know.
I don't know, that just always weirded me out a touch. But that's the thing about the show, is it is weird. It's I mean,
It's
it's literally in
quirky,
the title,
strange,
and
and silly, and funny, and horrific, and dramatic, and tense. It's a mishmash of almost everything. You know, it
yeah,
goes from like martial arts and horror to globe-trotting superhero-ness. You know, because that's essentially what the stand users are, aren't they?
essentially, yes.
You know, and then weird as hell. Well, there were like pop culture references in the first two parts, but Stardust Crusaders is when it goes crazy, isn't it?
Oh, they
It goes
amped it up, yeah,
Yeah,
and they continued that trend into later runs as well.
yes,
It's
yes,
something they very much leaned into.
yes.
To summarize, I mean, this is a show that I'm glad I watched. For all its weirdness and insanity, it's immensely entertaining. And if you take it for what it is, I mean, the story isn't as deep as some anime, but it's still enjoyable.
It's a cut above shonen, in my opinion, in general.
Yeah.
In the end, that is what this is. It's a boys' comic about boys becoming strong and fighting, but it's done with, you know, cleverer ideas than what was around at the time. I'm reading Fist of the North Star at the moment. You know, I'm on volume 9 now. I'm pretty much buying them as they translate them because it's been years since they've even attempted to translate in English. And this is like Fist of the North Star is like the original martial arts shonen, and pretty much every single volume is the monster of the week. You know, and it's just Kenshiro develops a new ability almost every time. You know, and it's got a funny name, and then he uses it and he wins. You know, and that's about it, really. You know, that's all it is. That's not to complain, criticize it. I mean, I'm not gonna to analyze it like a piece of literary, you know, work, because that's not what it is. It's a boys' comic book about men fighting purely for the sake of escapism. You know, it has the literary qualities of X-Men in the early 90s, or Iron Man in the 70s, you know, or Spider-Man in the 60s. It's just more violent and better drawn. You know, it is what it is, as you say, but what it is something that at the time was wholly original and smartly executed.
And had a lot of charm.
Yes. Yes.
So.
Yes. Yes, that's good. Yes. I haven't watched the modern anime adaptation yet, but to be honest with you, I'm not sure I can be bothered. I think I'd just rather read the manga.
I feel that at some point it might be worth your time. I mean, I did sit and watch it, and it is enjoyable. It does extend everything. And for instance, the final fight between Dio and Jotaro is a lot longer and a lot more entertaining. Well, I'm not say a lot more entertaining, but there's a lot more.
When you say it's longer, though,
it.
you mean they explain everything over and over again? Because it's so tiresome for me personally at this point in my life. I've got no time for over exposition.
I'm not going to deny there are a couple of times when the fight might pause so exposition can take place.
You know, but I don't know. I haven't read the manga for 15, 16, 17 years. I don't know. My tastes may have changed dramatically in the last 20 years of my life, so who knows. It is on the cards to reread it, though.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll wrap that up then, shall we?
Yeah.
So, yes, another episode complete. This is going to be the first in an ongoing series, I suppose, of us discussing anime or manga. Vintage or not, who knows? I imagine the next series / anime I'm going to discuss probably will be Akira, whenever that will be. And you may well end up discussing some more JoJo. We'll see. If you do end up watching more and decide to discuss more of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I'll be looking forward to that because I will be enlightened by it. I haven't yet to explore further. So, yes. I'm not sure what we're doing in the next episode. I can't remember, to be honest with you. Better look at the old notes and start thinking about that. And with that, I'm going to bid you goodbye. Hopefully, we'll see you soon.
Catch you later.
Bio Booster Armor.